Chapter 26. Mayor Bernard left, but Myron seemed to be eyeing David and did not leave. Instead, he began to talk to David about the interesting things in Parent City. Hans saw that David could communicate with people of the same age, and his eyes flashed with relief. It was not that he didn't want to pave the way for David in the past, but David's stubbornness and attitude towards him made it almost impossible for the father and son to talk together. David chatted with Myron while recalling the shadow attendant to float above his head. During this period, he paid special attention to Garen. With Mayor Bernard's attitude towards Garen's strength should be very powerful. If the shadow attendant was not discovered by Garen, then there was basically no need to worry about anyone discovering it. After the shadow attendant appeared, Garen still chatted as before without any reaction, which made David feel relieved. Hans, how have you been recently? David saw a middle-aged man coming to Hans and asked with concern. It was just that when David heard this voice, his whole body couldn't help but tremble. He was too familiar with this voice. It was the voice of the boss when Amos was talking to the boss at the entrance of the police station that day. It was impossible to be wrong because that day, David heard the voice through the shadow attendant. With the shadow attendant's strange hearing, it would not be wrong as long as it heard it once. David, what's wrong with you? Myron saw that David's expression was a little strange and asked softly. Nothing. Who is that person? David thought that Myron had a lot of connections and just introduced the identities of many guests to him. So he asked quickly, Don't you know him? Myron had a strange look on his face and asked curiously while looking at David. Myron, if I knew him, would I still need to ask you? David was anxious to know the result and said angrily, That is Mr. West, the owner of this West Hotel. Myron paused for a moment before continuing. His other identity is the father of Mrs. Hans. David's pupil shrank. He knew that Mrs. Hans was not his biological mother, but his stepmother, Bertha, but he never thought that the person who ordered Amos to follow him was Bertha's father. His mind was in turmoil. Did Bertha know that he was being followed, or was it Bertha's decision? He wondered if Bertha had been behind the death of his predecessor. Everything became even more confusing with the appearance of Stefan. Although the truth was closer, it was more complicated. Galen didn't join in when he saw Stefan coming over. He turned around and came to David's side. He happened to see David's expression and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He knew about David's situation. He also knew that Stefan's identity was very awkward for David, so he patted David's shoulder lightly. David, I'm a little tired. I heard that you have a private residence with a lot of empty rooms. I'll go and rest now. Take me there, Galen said to David. He didn't want to stay for a long time. He only came to take care of Parent City's reputation. Uncle Galen, welcome. David knew that Galen had misunderstood, but he also heard Galen's concern for him, so he smiled and nodded. Then I'll send you back. Myron took the initiative to ask. Hans, David and I will go back first. Galen didn't refuse Myron and waved to Hans. Without waiting for Hans to answer, he walked out with David. When Hans turned to look at Galen and David, a cold light flashed in Stefan's eyes. The guests of the New Year's Eve party usually waited until 12 o'clock to welcome the new year. However, not many people knew about Galen's identity, and David and Myron were two teenagers, so their departure didn't attract much attention. After walking out of Stefan's hotel, the cold wind blew. David's mind was clear. He knew that another enemy had surfaced, but he didn't know if Stefan was the mastermind behind it or if there was someone else, so he didn't want to tell anyone about it. In fact, if there was no evidence, it would be useless even if he told Hans. It would only worsen the relationship between Hans and Bertha, and the one who would suffer in the end would be little Eddie. So he chose to investigate it himself. With his electronic countermeasure ability, he would first find out the general situation and then decide what to do. At this time, the latest model of Gladstone Type 6 stopped in front of them. Myron opened the door and let Galen and David enter the car first. Then he got into the driver's seat and started the car. Myron, how did you get the permission to drive a car? David knew that Myron was about the same age as him and was also a senior high school student. But Myron could control the car by himself, so he couldn't help but ask. Haha, I passed the preliminary Kaji test, so my permission has already reached F level. Driving a car is a piece of cake. Myron said proudly. Galen smiled and didn't say anything as he watched the two teenagers communicate. Myron, your strength has reached 800 kilograms? David asked in disbelief. He was only halfway through his senior year, and his strength had already reached 800 kilograms. In other words, Myron's strength had already reached the minimum standard for non-university. With Myron's family background, there shouldn't be any problems in other aspects. I'm already 850 kilograms. I believe that I can reach 900 kilograms by the time I graduate. With Uncle Galen's guidance, I believe that getting into non-university will be a piece of cake. Myron said proudly. David looked at Myron with some envy. If David was a little rich, then Myron was a real winner in life. The preliminary Kaji test wasn't something for the poor, because the only purpose of this test was to give minors without any permission the lowest adult F-level permission. The preliminary Kaji test cost 100,000 credits, which was basically using credits to buy an F-level permission. Of course, the other reason why most people wouldn't take the test wasn't because of credits, but because of strength. 800 kilograms was the standard for the preliminary Kaji test, and only a small number of people could reach it. Take the Gladstone Type 6, for example. Just by looking at the interior decorations, one could tell that it was a newly bought car. It was a far cry from the second-hand Gladstone Type 3 that David drove. David, who was deeply affected, didn't speak much to Myron on the way. The Gladstone Type 6 was fast enough, and they soon arrived at David's residence. David, can I stay too? It'll be more convenient for me to receive Uncle Galen's guidance. Myron, whose skin was as thick as the sky, made an even more outrageous request as David became more and more accustomed to calling him Uncle Galen. David, let him stay, Galen said without waiting for David to speak. All right, Myron, you can use the guest room on the first floor. Uncle Galen, you can use the side bedroom on the second floor. David, seeing that Galen had agreed, directly assigned the rooms. The guest room on the first floor it is. Myron muttered with obvious dissatisfaction. He knew Galen's identity better than David, so he had to stay and receive Galen's guidance no matter what. David, rest well today. We'll start tomorrow morning. Galen reminded David before entering the room under the guidance of the AI, butler Emma. All right, Uncle Galen, David replied. As the owner, he couldn't completely ignore Myron. The AI butler Emma went to help Galen tidy up the room, so he could only help Myron. David, I found something in common between us again. Myron said to David with a smile. Something in common between us? David looked left and right. He didn't feel like he had anything in common with Myron, who was the son of a rich official, although he still had a little stash of 2 million credits and less than 80,000 credits left in his identity bracelet. That little stash of 2 million credits was dirty money. It was fine if he used it secretly, but if he really used it in a big way, he was afraid that he would be noticed very quickly. Of course, there's something in common. My AI butler also uses Emma's voice. Myron seemed to have found the same interest as he pointed upstairs and said, Myron, Emma's fans number in the hundreds of millions. I can find tens of millions of people who have the same thing in common with her, David said speechlessly. David, in 2 months, Emma will come to the Monolith Star and hold a concert in Non-City. Let's go together then, Myron suggested. Myron, I'm just a student. I don't have the authority to leave Parent City. Although David had a deep impression of Emma in his memory and really wanted to go to the concert, the situation didn't allow it. I'll think of something then. Myron patted his chest and promised. Chapter 27. David didn't go to bed right away. He had spent quite a bit of time attending the New Year's Eve party, and he had eaten quite a bit of food during the party. He first went to the underground fitness room to practice the 18 styles of body arts a few times. When he was completely exhausted, he went back to his room to wash up. Sitting on the big, soft bed, he took out the K2 military electronic countermeasure device and connected it to the Stet Hotel's security photon computer. Using his upgraded account, he entered the photon computer and began to search for information on Mr. Stet. There wasn't much information on Mr. Stet in the photon computer, only his age. But then again, as the owner of the Stet Hotel, It was normal for the photon computer to not have any information on him. But when David saw Mr. Stet's age, it was quite strange. In the information on the photon computer, Stet's age was 93 years old. This didn't match the middle-aged man Stet had seen at the party. When Stet and Hans stood together, Hans looked even older than Stet. Although Hans looked older than his actual age due to his body condition, it was still not something the 93-year-old Stet could compare to. Although the people above 90 in the Federation wouldn't look as old as David in his previous life, they wouldn't look as young as Stet either. David didn't think too much about it. Perhaps Stet had used some special beauty treatment that he didn't know about. The world of the rich wasn't something he could guess. The photon computer was the core of the Stet Hotel's security system. It contained all the information of the hotel, such as its finances, security records, company secrets, and all the information of its guests. The first thing David needed to find out was whether the Stet Hotel had anything to do with Jeremy. That was the biggest evidence to prove whether Stet was the mastermind behind the plot against him. Soon, he found the financial transactions between the Stet Hotel and Jeremy in the financial records. But it didn't show that the Stet Hotel had paid Jeremy. The truth was the opposite. Jeremy had been regularly investing in the Stet Hotel, and this kind of investment had been going on for more than 2 years, but David had only been in contact with Jeremy for a few months. In terms of time, there were too many strange things. Originally, David wanted to prove that Minster was the mastermind, but the results of his investigation only made things more complicated. He had misjudged the relationship between the two. Of course, the financial records were concealed. However, this kind of concealment was completely exposed after David directly broke the outer layer of disguise. Most likely, Stefan had never thought that anyone would be able to easily break into the photon computer that he thought was as solid as a rock. That was why he had placed a large amount of secret information into it. David also found the information of the dead security chief, Amos. This time, he easily confirmed that Amos was sent out by Stephen. The finance department had been giving out bonuses on the pretext of being sent out. After Amos was killed, a large sum of compensation was given to his family. David shook his head. The information provided by the photon computer wasn't as useful as he thought it would be. However, he was clear that Stet was involved. This allowed him to monitor Stet's whereabouts in turn. He set up a small program in Stet's schedule record. It would automatically send Stet's schedule to his identity bracelet every day. In the future, he would be able to monitor Stet's every move. Stet was a rich man in Parent City. His daily trips were planned. This made it easier for David to keep track of his movements. After doing all this, David put away the K2 military electronic detector and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning at 6 o'clock, David was woken up by the AI butler, Emma. When he walked downstairs, he saw Myron, who was also woken up. Myron didn't seem to be used to waking up so early. He was in a daze. "David, is there something wrong with your AI butler? Why did you wake me up so early?" Myron complained as soon as he saw David. "I didn't set it to wake you up at 6 o'clock. David shook his head and said. He then turned to look at the AI butler, Emma, and asked, "Emma, is there something wrong with your program?" "Self-check in progress." Self-check completed. The AI butler, Emma, heard the question and immediately began a self-check. Its eyes kept flashing and then returned to normal. Emma's body is normal. There is no program error. "Then why did you wake us up at 6 o'clock in the morning?" Myron interrupted and asked. "It was authorized by the highest authority, Hans. Mr. Galen has the second highest authority. He has the right to give me orders. The 6 o'clock wake-up was Mr. Galen's order." The AI butler, Emma, replied. "Young men, waking up at 6 o'clock is a good habit. I hope you can keep it up." Galen walked out of the dining room with a glass of fruit juice in his hand and said with a smile, "Good morning, Uncle Galen." Myron saw Galen and his previous complaints disappeared immediately. He greeted David together. "Emma, give them the breakfast you've prepared." Galen ordered the AI butler, Emma. He then turned to David and Myron and said, "Bring the breakfast and go to the underground training room. I want to see how you guys are doing." The AI butler, Emma, passed 2 lunchboxes to the 2 of them. David looked at the 10 portions of strengthened meat in the lunch boxes and knew that they were going to use up a lot of energy today. The 1,000-square-meter vegetable cultivation base outside the underground glass tunnel did not attract Myron's attention. It seemed like he was used to it. After entering the underground training room, David and Myron put down the lunch boxes and stood in front of Galen. I want to understand your mastery of physical skills first. The 18 styles of physical skills may seem simple, but they have been modified and perfected over 10,000 years. They're the most suitable physical skills for building a foundation. This will be your foundation in the future. Galen looked at the two young men in front of him and said with a smile, "Uncle Galen, I heard that physical skills were modified from the knight's training method of the great world of God. Is that true?" Myron asked curiously, perhaps because Galen was not serious. "Myron, if you are strong enough, you have the right to know. You don't have the right to ask now." Galen glanced at Myron and said in a deep voice. He then waved his hand and said, "Since you are so enthusiastic, you will practice the 18 styles of physical skills first." With a wave of Galen's hand, Myron's body involuntarily moved 5 meters to the center of the training room. "Then I will begin," Myron said straightforwardly. He then practiced the 18 styles of physical skills. From David's point of view, Myron's 18 styles of physical skills were much better than his own without the knowledge of the light bulb. According to David's estimation, Myron's 18 styles of physical skills were around 80% of the beginner level. After practicing the 18 styles of physical skills, Myron was sweating profusely. However, he looked at David proudly and showed off to David. "Not bad. Your mastery of the 18 styles of physical skills is already at the advanced beginner level. Looks like you have put in a lot of effort in this area." Galen nodded in satisfaction. The better the student's foundation, the easier it was for him to teach. "Uncle Galen, I haven't made any progress in the past few months. I can't even improve my strength and speed." Myron hurriedly asked for guidance. With his family's conditions, he naturally had the best teachers in Parent City to guide him. However, at his level, those teachers didn't have any good methods to help him improve. The foundation of strength and speed is your physique. If your physique doesn't improve, then your strength and speed will naturally not improve. Physique can generally be improved through special potions or physical skills training. I see that you have used strengthening potions before, so it's best that you don't use strengthening potions at this stage. Otherwise, you will lose the help of strengthening potions when you try to break through to the official Kaji. I will guide you in improving your physical skills in the next few days," Galen said with a smile. Myron nodded. He also knew his own problem. However, it was very difficult for him to improve the 18 styles of physical skills at his current level. This was also why Mayor Bernard did everything he could to get him to work under Galen. Every time a strengthening potion is used, it will develop a certain tolerance. This tolerance is not obvious during normal times, but when you need to break through the shackles, it will be fatal. Therefore, you must be careful when using strengthening potions, Galen said to Myron. Galen said to Myron, then glanced at David. This was not only for Myron, but also for David. Chapter 28. Myron picked up the lunchbox and stuffed the strengthened meat into his mouth. "David, why isn't it level 1 strengthened meat? The effect of the larvae's strengthened meat is too weak," he complained to David as he ate. "Myron, you could bring your own level 1 strengthened meat. Don't say such things when you're eating my share," David snapped. "Yeah, I'll ask my family to send level 1 strengthened meat over." Myron's eyes lit up as he smiled. David shook his head. He could tell that Myron wanted to use this method to send him level 1 strengthened meat without embarrassing him. In fact, with David's current wealth, if he wasn't afraid of being exposed, he would have no problem buying some level 1 strengthened meat for cultivation with the credits he had. However, since Myron took the initiative to ask for it, he would just treat it as his tuition fee. Anyway, this was nothing to Myron, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. "David, it's your turn." Garen smiled as he waited for the two to finish their conversation before asking David. "Yes, Uncle Garen." David nodded. He was already burning with passion and wanted to ask Garen for guidance. He came to the center of the fitness room and stood up. He began to exert his strength, and a trace of heat radiated from his body. Myron didn't feel anything, but Garen's eyes lit up as he stared at David. 99% of the beginner level of the 18 styles of physical arts was already the limit that no one other than Kaji could achieve. To be able to reach the proficient level of physical arts before Kaji, every one of them was a monster. Garen didn't expect to meet a young man who was about to break through the beginner level of the 18 styles of physical arts in a small place like Parent City. This young man was even the child of his good friend. Damn you, Hans. How blind are you? Such a genius only has 600 kilograms of strength because he doesn't have any resources. If he had resources, he would have become Kaji long ago. Garen couldn't help but murmur to himself as he watched David begin to practice the 18 forms of the body arts. He had only started with the first form. The reason why Garen said this was because the 18 styles of body techniques were the foundation. Every time the 18 styles of body techniques were upgraded, it would be upgraded along with the body's constitution. In Galen's opinion, David's current situation was due to insufficient cultivation resources. As a result, David could only keep practicing the 18 body technique styles, causing the level of the 18 body technique styles to exceed the speed of the growth of his constitution. However, the vast majority of people were unable to improve their physical techniques due to the fact that the energy in their bodies was too abundant and they were unable to continue improving their physique. Myron was a classic example. Despite having sufficient resources, Myron was unable to progress further because of the 18 styles of body arts. David was still practicing the 18 styles of the body arts. Each style was slow and steady, and each movement carried with it a surge of heat. This was the manifestation of a large amount of his body's functions. It could be said that the energy consumption required for each style was almost double that of Myron's 18 styles. Therefore, David was sweating profusely at this moment, and his physical strength was rapidly depleting. When the 10th move began, his movements became even slower. Garen's figure flashed and appeared beside David like a phantom. His speed was so fast that Myron felt as if he had seen a ghost. David's physical strength was still enough, but because he had to do his best to ensure the coordination of his muscles and bones, he could only slow down his movements. However, after slowing down, the difficulty of the 18 styles of body arts increased again. The 11th, 12th, 13th, and all the way until the 14th move. This was David's limit before. His body began to tremble slightly, and he was about to fail at any moment. At this moment, Garen slapped David's body with one hand. When David felt that he was unable to control his muscles and bones, he successfully controlled the coordination of his muscles and bones under the external force of the slap. After completing the 14th move, he instinctively continued to practice the 15th move. A strange expression appeared on Garen's face. He thought that David's inability to support the 14th move was David's limit. However, it seemed that this was not David's limit. David was still continuing to practice the 15th move. Just as the 15th move began, David's muscles and bones once again went out of control. Garen was already prepared for this. He struck again, and as soon as David's muscles and bones went out of control, he would slap at the areas where they could not be controlled, thus allowing David to continue. The 16th move, the 17th move, the 18th move, and finally the 18th move. After Garen slapped 10 times in a row, David finally completed the practice. The moment David completed the practice, his entire body was sweating profusely, as if he had just walked out of a sweatshop. Garen waved his hand, and a suction force was emitted from his hand. The food box on the ground was sucked into his hand. "David, hurry up and eat." He opened the box and handed it to David. David's body was empty. He felt like he could swallow a cow at this moment. He did not care about the amount of strengthened meat, and directly stuffed the strengthened meat in the box into his mouth. Fortunately, his body had great strength, and his chewing ability was also incomparably strong. After grinding the strengthened meat with his hard teeth for a few times, it was swallowed into his stomach. Traces of heat flowed from his stomach to all parts of his body, and this heat constantly replenished the emptiness in his body. David felt that the strengthened meat had never tasted so good before. However, his hands were soon empty. He had finished all the strengthened meat in the box. "You really have a big appetite," Myron muttered as he handed the box of strengthened meat that he had only eaten one serving and the remaining 9 servings to David. David was also shocked by his own appetite. He remembered that there were 10 servings of strengthened meat in the box. Even if his consumption had increased greatly recently, he could only consume 3 servings of strengthened meat at a time. However, at this moment, he felt that his body still needed it, so he did not hold back. He took the box of food and continued to eat. After 2 minutes, David had stuffed all the strengthened meat into his stomach. Only then did he feel satisfied. A large amount of heat flowed from his stomach to all parts of his body, making him feel very comfortable. "David, take a break. Show me the 18 styles of body arts again." The strange look in Garen's eyes became more intense as he continued to request. "Uncle Garen, with David's condition, should we continue after the level 1 strengthened meat is delivered?" Myron looked at the 2 empty food boxes and could not help but suggest, "It's fine." David's body arts had a breakthrough, and it led to an increase in his vitality. Garen waved his hand and said, after the 2 boxes of strengthened meat entered his stomach and digested it for a while, David's body no longer felt powerless. Instead, it was filled with energy. He felt like he was about to explode. So when Garen asked him to practice the 18 styles of body arts again, he did not even need to rest. He immediately stood up and began to practice the 18 styles of body arts. This time, David felt an obvious difference. From the first style of the 18 styles of body arts, he felt relaxed and at ease. If he had to deliberately control his muscles and bones to coordinate with the 18 styles of body arts before, now his muscles and bones were actively pushing the 18 styles of body arts forward. At this moment, Myron's eyes were wide open. He did not understand the body arts just now, but he knew very well what David's body arts meant. There was a huge gap between beginner and proficiency in body arts. This gap represented the difference between Kaji and an ordinary person. Only when one's strength reached 1,000 kilograms and trained with 3 times the vitality of an ordinary person could one reach proficiency in body arts. Myron's face was burning as he recalled how he had just shown off his advanced beginner body arts to David. Garen looked at David practicing the styles of body arts and thought about the gift he gave David before. The so-called non-university accepting David was now a joke. Being able to reach proficiency in body arts before Kaji, even if there were some differences in other aspects, non-university would make an exception and accept him. This was the basic preferential treatment for geniuses. Not only non-university, but other universities would also do their best to accept David if they knew about his situation. David finished practicing the 18 styles of body arts. The 19 portions of strengthened meat he ate before no longer gushed out heat. He felt his body was stronger than ever. If it weren't for Garen and Myron, he would have immediately asked the shadow attendant to come over and open his status panel for him. Chapter 29. David, have you taken a level 2 strengthening potion? Galen asked after seeing David's steady breathing and sensing the improvement of David's physique. Father prepared a bottle of level 2 strengthening potion for me a few days ago, but I didn't take it because I felt that my body arts were about to break through, David replied. David, don't take the level 2 strengthening potion. If you encounter any difficulties in breaking through to Kaji, the level 2 strengthening potion can help you break through. Of course, it's very likely that breaking through to Kaji will be a very easy task, Galen said with some emotion. Proficiency in body arts was a smooth path for a Kaji. Moreover, the improvement after breaking through would naturally be much higher than that of an ordinary Kaji. Most importantly, his foundation would be more solid. David, Myron, you have to understand that 1,000 kilograms is the limit of our body. Body arts are the key to unlocking this limit. Many people use large amounts of resources to forcefully break through to Kaji, but neglect the importance of body arts. Doing so will limit the height of their future growth. I hope that you will try to limit the use of supplementary methods, like strengthening potions. Try to use the most primitive strengthening meat as much as possible. Primitive and unblended strengthening meat is the purest source of strengthening resources. Although the improvement is small, it won't cause any hidden dangers, Galen continued in a deep voice. Uncle Galen, then I can't use the strengthening potion? I've already taken 2 bottles of level 2 strengthening potion. Myron asked worriedly. Why did your father only give you 2 bottles of level 2 strengthening potion and not more? You're stuck in your current state. You only need 1 more bottle of level 2 strengthening potion to break through. He's protecting you and doesn't want to hurt your foundation. He hopes that you can break through to Kaji through improving your body arts. Galen explained with a smile. Myron nodded understandingly. David, your situation is special. You haven't taken the level 2 strengthening potion yet, so your body is extremely pure and unaffected by the potion. Some of the ingredients in the potion will affect your body, so it's best if you continue to improve yourself through physical skills unless absolutely necessary. Once you become a Kaji, you'll understand the benefits, Galen turned to David and said. David nodded. As far as he knew, the enhancement potion might contain ingredients similar to stimulants, which would be harmful to the body. In order to let more people become Kaji, they had no choice but to release the enhancement potion to increase the number of Kaji. Myron, inform your father and have him deliver 2 warhammers. David lacks everything here. Garen didn't hold back at all and directly requested, Uncle Garen, do I have to use a warhammer in the future? Myron asked with a bitter expression. He had been practicing with the sword for a long time and was confident that he was very talented with it. He was really reluctant to switch to a warhammer. Oh, you can choose other heavy weapons, but I've only learned the warhammer in the past. I can't guarantee the teaching effect of other heavy weapons. Garen replied indifferently. Uncle Garen, I don't understand why you have to choose heavy weapons. Can't you use a longsword? Myron was still insisting. Myron, if you don't want to become a Kaji who fights the insectoids, then you can choose any weapon you want. However, if you do want to fight the insectoids, then holding a longsword will not only harm you, but also your companions. Garen seemed to have thought of something and spoke with a hint of sadness. Longswords were the favorite weapon of many young people because they were easy to carry and light to use. They easily attracted the attention of girls. However, an insectoid shell required a lot of power to deal more damage, even with a weapon of the same quality. Longswords were mainly used for stabbing, but they were not as good as spears in stabbing, as good as axes in slashing, and as good as warhammers in striking. Of course, it wasn't that there weren't powerful Kaji who used longswords on the battlefield, but those Kaji were all at the peak of Kaji. Their strength had already reached the limit of 2,000 kilograms. Under the premise of ensuring the effectiveness of their attacks, the flexibility of a longsword could bring about faster and more damage. However, this was only for peak Kaji. Ordinary Kaji still had to focus on the effectiveness of their attacks. With the speed of the insectoids, there weren't many chances for a Kaji to land a hit. Every strike had to be guaranteed to deal the most damage. Uncle Garen, I'll learn the warhammer from you. Myron didn't know if he understood, but he still chose to believe in Garen. David, don't practice anymore today. Rest more, Garen said to David, then turned to Myron and said, Next, I'll guide you on physical skills. Let's start with the first style. Under Myron's envious gaze, David left the underground fitness room. As soon as David left the fitness room, he quickened his pace and somewhat couldn't wait to return to the bedroom. There were 2 guests in the house. Only the private bedroom would be undisturbed. The invisible shadow attendant flew to his side. He placed his hand on the shadow attendant, and the familiar attribute panel appeared in front of him. Name, David Kerstrength, 301 Agility, 191 Constitution, 301 Spirit, 301 Literature, 3% Proficient, Mathematics, 5% Proficient, General, 51% Beginner, Physical Skills, 1% Proficient, Longsword Mastery, 5% Beginner, Electronic countermeasures, 98% proficient. His physical skills had broken through to 1% proficiency. His strength, speed, and constitution had all received a huge breakthrough. With 3.0 strength, his strength had reached 800 kilograms. With 1.9 agility, his 100-meter dash speed had reached 8.4 seconds. This result was enough to qualify for the NA and university's entrance exam. According to Garin, his constitution, which was the most important attribute, had reached 3.0, which was the same as his strength. With his previous experience, his strength could reach far beyond 800 kilograms. It's a pity that there's no way to train agility alone. Maybe I can learn it when I go to university. David thought to himself as he looked at the lowest agility attribute on the attribute panel. In fact, speed had always been Kaji's weakness. Even with the enhancement of the exoskeleton armor, his speed couldn't be compared with the Zerg of the same level. This was also the reason why Kaji had to gang up on the Zerg of the same level to win. David sensed the Warhammer Mastery, 82% proficiency, knowledge ball in the shadow attendant's body. Since Garin was going to teach him how to use a Warhammer from Myron, the Warhammer Mastery, 82% proficiency, knowledge ball needed to be learned first. He ordered the shadow attendant to transfer the Warhammer Mastery, 82% proficiency, knowledge ball into his body. As the knowledge ball entered his body suddenly shook and a blood-red illusion appeared in front of his eyes. Although David had been prepared, the illusion in front of him still surprised him. He was standing on a vast flatland. The ground was dark brown, and the air was full of the stench of blood and decay. He held a huge warhammer in his hand. This warhammer was 1.5 meters long and had a strange luster on its body. The two sides of the warhammer head, one was a sharp horn and the other was a flat surface. The handle of the warhammer was chained to his right arm, so the warhammer wouldn't leave his body. David wanted to move his body, but he found that he could only sense this body and couldn't control it. He could feel the weight of the warhammer in his right arm, feel the biting, cold wind blowing across his cheeks, and feel the hardness of the ground under his feet. But it was only perception. He was like a bystander locked in another body. Just as he was still observing the situation of his body, the body suddenly moved. Its right hand moved forward, and the warhammer in its hand drew a perfect arc in the air. The target of the warhammer was a hunter mantis that had appeared out of nowhere. In the Zerg Atlas that David studied in school, the hunter mantis was a Zerg land scout. Its shell was weak, but it was very fast. Its weapon was a pair of scythe-like, chain-like limbs. This was a weak existence among the Zerg. Of course, this was for the powerful Kaji. An ordinary Kaji might not even be able to catch a glimpse of its shadow. Die! With a roar, David felt the power in his body suddenly erupt with this roar. The warhammer in his hand moved forward even faster. However, the hunter mantis also accelerated at the same time. Its body brushed past the warhammer, and one of its sides cut towards David's waist with a strange counterjoint. Chapter 30. Even though he knew that he was in an illusion, David still felt danger. This was his first time facing a Zerg, and a level 1 Zerg at that. He could clearly see the dark green luster on the hunter mantis scythe and the serrated teeth on the scythe. If he was hit by such a weapon, he would be seriously injured. David sensed danger, but it was useless because this body was not under his control at all. Of course, if it was under his control, it was most likely that he would turn around and run. With the hunter mantis speed, he would die even faster. Just as David's heart tightened, his body moved. He took half a step back, and, at the same time, the handle of the war hammer in his hand pressed down. With a clang, the hammer's handle collided with the hunter mantis scythe. David felt a huge force in his body, but this force was transferred to the war hammer as he turned his body around. He then attacked the hunter mantis again. David did not know that this hunter mantis had the same combat power as a real hunter mantis, but the hunter mantis in front of him made him feel the terror of the Zerg. This was the weakest level 1 Zerg, yet it was able to fight this body at close range. This body was also very strong, and the war hammer was like a part of its body. David felt like he was brushing shoulders with death every second, and he continued to improve his mastery of the Warhammer. In fact, no matter what kind of teaching, it could not be as real as David's learning in the illusion. This body seemed to be tireless, and the hunter mantis was like a perpetual motion machine. The two of them kept going back and forth at close range. Slowly, David's attention became more and more focused. It was as if he had become the owner of this body, personally wielding the Warhammer and fighting the hunter mantis. A large amount of battle experience poured into his mind and imprinted in his soul. Warhammer mastery, 82% proficiency. The owner of the knowledge ball, Amos, was also an elite Kaji who had returned from Warstar. Although his will had been eroded by his pampered life, his battle experience was still there. This could be seen from the instant decision he made when facing the unbeatable leader of the Heavenly Wolf mercenary group, Froman. If there had not been an accident, he would have been able to escape unscathed. What David received was his life's experience of using the Warhammer. Amos' experience of using the Warhammer had been improved from countless life and death battles with the Zerg. These experiences were also transformed into the illusion of this battle that appeared in front of David. David could not tell whether this was reality or an illusion because he had completely merged with this body. He had a control of the Warhammer to fight the hunter mantis. Just now he was distracted. The hunter mantis scythe had cut a long wound on his back. The intense pain made him concentrate even more. It was just a hunter mantis, but it made him feel a pressure that he had never felt before. Under this kind of pressure, the battle between him and the hunter mantis was almost the same as the battle he had watched in the beginning. He and the hunter mantis attacked and defended each other. After an unknown amount of time, the hunter mantis's figure slowly became transparent. Then the whole space shook violently. The warhammer in his hand also became transparent. David could not help but want to hold the warhammer tightly. In his mind, the warhammer was a part of his body. The loss of the warhammer was as uncomfortable as losing a limb. Huff, huff, huff. David took in a big breath of fresh air. At this time, the air was no longer bloody and stinky. The illusion had disappeared, and he was still in the bedroom. His clothes were wet and dry after practicing the 18 styles of body arts. Now they were all wet with sweat. David clenched his empty hand a few times. He was not used to the feeling of not having the handle of the warhammer because he had just fought in the illusion for a long time. Shadow Attendant opened the attribute panel. He pressed his hand on the Shadow Attendant and ordered in his heart. Then he saw that in his ability there was an additional warhammer mastery, 82% proficiency. However, he was very clear that although there was warhammer mastery, 82% proficiency, on the attribute panel, there was still a long way to go before he could really use warhammer mastery at 82% proficiency. He needed to practice constantly. It was just that the process of his practice would be very short. The decades of experience of others might be counted in days for him. At this time, he did not go to rest. He wanted to continue the integration because the next light ball he was going to integrate was only at the entry level. It was not difficult for his body to bear it. Although the light ball of heavy axe mastery, 33% entry level, was not of much help to him, it might be useful to master the use of one more weapon. With this in mind, he ordered the Shadow Attendant to move the light ball of heavy axe mastery, 33% entry level, into his body. The illusion that appeared this time was very normal. This was a training room, and the body holding a heavy axe was practicing. All kinds of standard heavy axe techniques were being practiced over and over again. It was like hypnosis. David had 82% proficiency in warhammer mastery, and he felt that the practice of the heavy axe was very simple. When he opened his eyes, he felt that the integration process this time was the fastest. Of course, this was only the feeling in the illusion. In fact, the time he spent in the illusion was completely different from the time in the outside world. Even if he had practiced for several years in the illusion, only a few minutes had passed in the outside world. This kind of spiritual experience transfer could not be explained by science at all. It could only be said that the ability of a Shadow Attendant was too strong. After 2 integrations, David's spirit was also tired. He went to wash up and change into clean clothes. Without caring about the time, he fell into a deep sleep on the bed. When David woke up, he looked at the time on his ID bracelet on his wrist. It was already 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He rubbed his empty stomach. He had eaten so much strength and meat today, but now he was panicking with hunger. If it weren't for the large amount of credits he had, he was afraid that he would eat until he became poor. One must know that ever since he had been practicing body arts, normal food could not satisfy his energy consumption. Only strength and meat could replenish his body's energy consumption. When he arrived at the dining room on the first floor, he saw Myron dragging his legs and trembling as he moved. "Myron, what's wrong with you?" David asked as he looked at Myron, amused. "David, why aren't you helping me up? I've done the 18 styles of body arts 10 times. 10 times. Myron looked at David as if he had seen his savior and complained. David stepped forward to support Myron. He understood Myron's current situation very well. The 18 styles of body arts consumed a lot of energy, let alone 10 times in a day. "Emma, prepare more strength and meat for Myron and me." David ordered the AI butler Emma loudly. "Yes, master." The AI butler Emma replied as she began to get busy. When David helped Myron to sit down, there were already 2 plates of strength and meat on the dining table. Myron, you really got someone to send over level 1 strength and meat." David looked at the different strength and meat on the plate and said in surprise, "Of course, it's easy for my father to get level 1 strength and meat. He just needs to mention it, and someone will send it over." Myron said indifferently. There were many organizations that went out to hunt Zergs in Parent City. Although most of the level 1 enhanced meat would be sent to bigger cities further away to earn more profits, it was not difficult for Bernard, the mayor of Parent City, to get some if he wanted. David sighed as he put a piece of level 1 strengthened meat into his mouth. The feeling of energy jumping in his mouth made his hungry body sing with joy. "Where's Uncle Garen?" After the hunger subsided, David realized that Garen was nowhere to be seen. He could not help but ask. Uncle Garen said to investigate the Heavenly Wolf mercenaries. Speaking of which, the Heavenly Wolf mercenaries are really bold. I heard from my father that the Heavenly Wolf mercenaries' warship has been captured. Other than the few mercenaries who attacked you, the rest of the Heavenly Wolf mercenaries have been captured. Myron was well informed and said with a smile. His words were full of disdain for the Heavenly Wolf mercenaries. Even if the other party was Kaji, he still needed to know who he could provoke and who he could not. Even Myron himself had to be careful and did not dare to bring trouble to his family. David did not feel much about the Heavenly Wolf mercenaries. Although they had attacked him, they had also sent him a huge amount of wealth and 98% proficiency in electronic countermeasures. Of course, as his enemy, it was better to die than to live. Chapter 31. The next morning, both David and Myron appeared in the dining hall at 6 o'clock sharp without needing the AI, butler Emma, to wake them up. As 2 people who wanted to become Kaji, they were very excited to be able to receive Galen's guidance. Of course, they would do as Galen asked. When Galen arrived at the dining hall and saw the 2 eating, a satisfied look appeared on his face. It was impossible to become a powerhouse without hard work and a serious attitude. "David, come here." He pointed at David, who had just finished his meal. David came to Galen's side. Galen patted David's body lightly. David felt a small force strangely transmitted to every muscle and bone in his body. "Not bad. Your strength has reached the entrance standard of non-university. With your muscle state, you should have no problem with speed. As expected, mastering a body art at the proficient level at this stage will improve very quickly. As long as your strength and muscles can keep up, I believe you can reach Kaji's minimum strength and speed standards by the time of the college entrance exam." Galen said with a satisfied smile. "Uncle Galen, can I reach David's level of body art mastery?" Myron heard Galen's words and couldn't help but ask. Although there was hope for him to get into Na and university with Galen's guidance, there was no way he could reach Kaji's standards before the college entrance exam. After breaking through 200 kilograms of strength, every bit of growth was extremely difficult, especially after 500 kilograms. Most students would be stuck at this point. Those who could break through were those who consumed strengthened muscles all year round, or those who were gifted. Now, every bit of growth was extremely slow for Myron. However, David's strength was still 600 kilograms yesterday, and now was 800 kilograms today. How could Myron not be moved by such a huge leap in strength? Although I can guide you in the movements of your body arts, you have to find the most suitable combination of your bones and muscles. There are no shortcuts to this, and the only way is to train hard. David's situation is extremely special. When his constitution stagnated, he used his innate talent to forcefully raise his body arts to the pinnacle of beginner level. All he lacked was a final push, and all I did was give him the final push. Galen shook his head, shattering Myron's fantasy. Sigh. Myron sighed in disappointment. Myron, your conditions are very good. Hurry up and practice. Galen casually knocked Myron's head and scolded him with a smile. I'll go right now. Myron quickly covered his head and ran towards the basement. David, I've found the hiding place of the 4 Kaji mercenaries of the Heavenly Wolf mercenaries. We'll kill them when there's less people's work during the day. Galen turned his head and said to David, who was about to follow him to the gym with a smile. Galen says to watch. David's heart stirred. This was a rare opportunity. If the 4 soldiers were killed on the spot, then his harvest would be great. He hurriedly requested, SSSS. If it were any other student, he wouldn't have agreed to watch Kaji's battle. This was because it was very likely to create psychological pressure on the student and affect their development. However, it was different for David. His proficient-level physical skills would allow David to rapidly improve in the coming days. Becoming a Kaji was no longer an obstacle for David. Only by understanding Kaji's strength in advance would he not let David become arrogant. David and Galen walked into the gym together. The moment they entered the gym, David saw 2 1-meter-long battle hammers on the ground. He resisted the urge to pick up the warhammer and began to practice the 18 styles of body arts. This time, he did not feel tired at all after practicing the 18 styles of body arts. Instead, he felt refreshed, as if all the muscles in his body had been opened up. The level 1 strengthened meat he ate for breakfast had turned into energy and was being absorbed by his body. After just one practice, he felt that his body had improved a little. It was a significant improvement. David, the best number of times you can practice your body arts is twice a day. Any more, and you'll have negative effects. Practice once in the morning and once in the morning. That way, you'll have more time to practice other skills. Galen reminded when he saw David's expression. Myron had also finished his 18 styles of body arts. However, he was sweating profusely and felt like he would collapse at any moment. Myron, don't stop. Do it again after the break. You have to practice the body arts at least 10 times a day. You have to remember the key points of each form. Only then can you improve quickly. Garen turned to Myron and reminded him. Why? Myron sat on the ground and muttered to himself. David looked at him and felt a little amused. At the same time, he felt helpless. He couldn't let him use the ball of knowledge. Not to mention the secret of the shadow attendant. He didn't even know what would happen if he gave it to someone else. He didn't know if it would succeed or kill them directly. The ball of knowledge was used on the soul. He was the master of the shadow attendant. That was why the ball of knowledge was so harmless. No one would dare to try such a mysterious thing. David, Myron, I'll teach you how to use the warhammer today. Galen saw that his 2 students were resting and did not waste any time. He didn't have much time. If he could solve the problem of the Heavenly Wolf mercenary group today, he could only stay for 3 more days at most. The originally scheduled time had to be brought forward because of the news from afar. David and Myron focused their attention on Galen and listened attentively. It doesn't matter if it's a warhammer, a heavy axe, a spear, or other light weapons. The way to practice is to start with the basic techniques and then integrate these basic techniques into battle. It's a long process. Of course, talented people can shorten the process. Galen paused and looked at David. who was listening attentively. I won't teach you the basic Warhammer techniques. With your strength and speed, you've completely met the entry requirements of the Storm Warhammer technique. There are a total of 36 styles in this technique. Once you've reached the entry level, you can completely crush the advanced basic Warhammer techniques. Galen continued. His words made David and Myron's eyes light up. Let alone high school students, most university students could only learn basic weapon techniques. How could they come into contact with more advanced weapon techniques? According to Galen, as long as they practiced the Storm Warhammer technique to the entry level, they could defeat intermediate basic Warhammer techniques. It was easy to see how precious the Storm Warhammer technique was. Galen must have put in a lot of effort to build a foundation for them. I'll demonstrate it first. Watch carefully, Galen said as he picked up a warhammer from the ground and waved it gently. Then, Galen waved the warhammer and began to demonstrate at a slow speed. David's attention was completely focused on Galen. His mind was extremely clear because of his Spirit 3.0. He could see and remember Galen's every movement, including the force exerted by his muscles and bones. If he hadn't fused with the 82% proficiency of Warhammer Mastery, he would only be able to grasp the general posture at most. However, with the 82% proficiency of Warhammer Mastery, he could see a lot more. He was completely immersed in Galen's practice. The Storm Warhammer technique was being perfected in his mind bit by bit. From David's point of view, Galen's slow demonstration was more difficult than fast demonstration. It was much easier to make the muscles exert force quickly and make the warhammer dance under inertia than to move slowly bit by bit. How much do you remember? Galen finished the demonstration of the Storm Warhammer technique and asked without blushing or panting. He gave the two students the feeling that the demonstration just now didn't take him any effort at all. I remember everything. David answered. I remember the first 6 moves. Myron answered. Both of them answered at the same time, but not at the same time. David and Myron looked at each other. David looked at Myron and said, "It's such a simple technique, and you only remember the first 6 moves." Myron stared at David with only one word in his eyes: bullshit. Chapter 32. David, have you really memorized all of it? Garen asked in disbelief. He had seen a lot of geniuses, but the Storm Warhammer technique was not an ordinary basic technique. Although David's body had reached the standard of practicing the Storm Warhammer technique, the complexity of the Storm Warhammer technique, as well as the use and transformation of various forces, made it difficult for even those who had learned the basic Warhammer technique to memorize it. As far as Garen knew, David had never learned how to use a warhammer before, just like Myron. Uncle Garen, I've memorized all of it, David replied with certainty. Then practice at once, Garen requested directly after hearing David's confirmation. He was still doubtful. David nodded and took the warhammer from Garen. The moment he took the warhammer, David's aura changed. An indomitable aura erupted from his body. Garen was stunned when he sensed David's aura. A warhammer was a weapon that was purely used for attack. It required an indomitable aura. If he didn't know that David had never learned how to use a warhammer before, he would have thought that David had been practicing the warhammer since he was young. However, who had ever seen a person who didn't even have a warhammer at home? Did he practice the warhammer with a long sword hanging on the wall? David ignored Garen's probing gaze and Myron's amused expression. When he picked up the warhammer, he became one with the warhammer in his hand. It was as if the warhammer had become a part of his body. Although this warhammer was not the style he liked, it was fine as long as he had a warhammer mastery level of 82%. When he began to practice the Storm Warhammer technique, he realized the importance of the proficient level of body skills. It was because he had mastered the control of his bones and muscles during the process of practicing the proficient level of body skills that he could practice the Storm Warhammer technique much more easily than he had imagined. Myron's eyes widened as he watched David complete the Storm Warhammer technique. He began to doubt his own intelligence. Why was it that even though the two of them were learning together, and even though he was better than David in terms of physical fitness, he had only memorized the first 6 moves, while David had practiced them one by one without stopping, without any signs of unfamiliarity? Unlike Myron, Galen saw much more than that. At this time, David was not only simulating the Storm Warhammer technique he had just practiced, but also incorporating his own understanding. In his mind, David was like the real Kaji who had immersed himself in using a Warhammer for many years. Along with David's practice, David's indomitable aura gained a trace of bitter killing intent. Although the killing intent was very unstable, Garen couldn't understand how David was able to do it. There was only one possibility, and that was that David was a prodigy. He was an unparalleled prodigy in both physical skills and the use of Warhammers. In reality, David was only able to use the Warhammer so quickly because of Garen's guidance. The method of slowly demonstrating each and every detail of a powerful technique was what David needed the most for his growth. If David had gone to look for videos or other low-level instructors to teach him, there was no way that he would be able to reach such a level on his first try. Myron, you should also demonstrate the first 6 moves that you've learned, Garen said as he handed over a Warhammer to Myron. Myron glanced at David, who had finished his demonstration. He didn't want to be compared to David at a time like this, but he had to do as Garen asked. Hurry up and start. Don't compare yourself to David. Just be yourself, Garen said in a deep voice. Myron picked up the Warhammer and was about to begin the demonstration, but he was interrupted by Garen before he could begin. The way you're holding the Warhammer is wrong. It should be like this, Garen said as he corrected Myron's mistake. After correcting Myron, Garen discovered his mistake as soon as he began the first move, but he didn't remind him this time. Instead, he watched as Myron continued his demonstration. It wasn't until Myron finished the first 6 moves that Garen was certain of. Myron's situation was normal, while David's was a true prodigy. David, take that Warhammer to the side and practice on your own. I'll teach Myron for a while, Garen said as he waved his hand at David. Although a good student could save a teacher a lot of trouble, if a student was too talented, the teacher would also feel helpless. With Garen's strength, teaching David wasn't a problem, but he couldn't reach the proficiency level on his first try. After reaching the proficiency level, it wasn't a matter of the teacher's guidance anymore. Instead, the student had to experience all kinds of battles to form their own style of using the Warhammer. David nodded, picked up the Warhammer, and went to the side to practice on his own. He was like a child who had just gotten a new toy. From the first move of the Storm Warhammer technique, he was constantly improving his familiarity with the Warhammer. Now, he needed to practice. Garen had Myron correct his mistakes bit by bit, starting from the first move. Fortunately, Myron wasn't stupid. Mayor Bernard was willing to pay the price to send him here, because he had enough confidence in Myron's talent. From his first contact with the Warhammer, Myron was slowly entering the stage of understanding. Garen didn't need him to enter the threshold immediately. Instead, he gave Myron the correct practice method to master the Storm Warhammer technique without any mistakes. In the future, as long as Myron worked hard, his mastery of the Warhammer would naturally improve. Garen initially had the same idea for David. However, David's talent caught him off guard, and an accident occurred in his plan. Myron focused on learning from Garen. Whether it was the Storm Warhammer technique or Garen's guidance, both were extremely rare. He didn't want to waste any time. However, just as Myron was concentrating on learning, David, who was practicing on his own, kept disturbing him. Of course, it wasn't that David wanted to disturb him. David's practice was getting deeper and deeper. David's Storm Warhammer technique was getting more and more compatible with his 82% proficiency level Warhammer mastery. When Myron was practicing, he could feel the chilling intent coming from David from time to time. Myron was only a student. Although his background in Parent City wasn't small, he couldn't understand this kind of chilling intent. Garen's eyes were filled with horror. David had only practiced for less than 2 hours, and his originally thin, killing intent had been strengthened to the point of being exposed. It could be said that at this time, except for the fact that David wasn't Kaji himself, his mastery of the Warhammer had actually reached the level of an experienced Kaji who used the Warhammer as his main weapon. Garen looked at David, then at Myron, and felt the gap between the two. When Myron saw Garen's eyes, he felt a deep blow. Myron had always thought of himself as a genius. In the school, in the social circle, he was the leader of the younger generation. But today, compared to David, he was an idiot. Myron, you watch from the side. Garen grabbed the war hammer in Myron's hand and said. Then he smiled at David and said, David, let's spar. As he spoke, Garen held the war hammer in his hand and struck David's chest. Of course, with his control, he wouldn't hurt David. He could withdraw the war hammer in his hand when he came into contact with David's body. He did this to give David some pressure. Otherwise, if such a genius went too smoothly, it would be detrimental to his growth. Only with fear could one grow better. Garen thought that David would be flustered and unable to deal with such a simple strike. No matter how much of a genius David was, it was still his first time using a war hammer. He had just learned how to use the war hammer. No matter how good his mastery was, there was still a big gap between him and actual combat. However, David's reaction surprised him greatly. David's war hammer drew an arc in the air, and with this force, David's body just happened to lean to the side to avoid Garen's war hammer. At the same time, the war hammer in David's hand turned in the air and struck at Garen's arm. Although Garen was surprised, his own strength was much higher than David's. He slightly moved his hand, and the war hammer flipped up and down while dodging David's war hammer. Good, Garen shouted. He also brought out some of his standard and began to launch a concentrated attack at David. Chapter 33. The training turned into a battle right from the start, and they were evenly matched, at least on the surface. Back then, Garen's mastery of the war hammer was much higher than David's, but this kind of training made it difficult for him to use some of his killer moves. At the same time, David's responses were almost flawless. Unless he crushed David by force, it would be very difficult for him to defeat David in a short period of time. After 3 minutes of battle, the admiration in Garen's eyes grew stronger. However, he also recalled the original intention of the training. The corner of his mouth curled into a smile, and the war hammer in his hand suddenly hit David's war hammer at twice the speed. David felt his hand go numb. Although he tried hard to grab the war hammer in his hand, the strike contained an endless force that made it impossible for him to resist. The war hammer in his hand flew out of his hand. Garen casually tossed his war hammer, and it hit David's war hammer that flew out of his hand. The two war hammers collided in the air, but they stuck together and fell to the ground silently. This time, it was David's turn to be surprised. How good must one's control of the war hammer be to be able to make it as light as a feather? Not bad, David. Your learning ability is very strong. Keep practicing in the future, and you will become an outstanding Kaji. Garen boasted. In fact, he was trying his best to keep the compliments in check. This wasn't a strong learning ability. This was an abnormal learning ability. Uncle Garen, I will work hard. David nodded seriously. He wouldn't be arrogant. Only he knew that although his spirit had reached 3.0 and his learning speed was indeed impressive, it was far from enough to reach his current level. The reason why he could achieve this was all because he had fused with the corresponding knowledge light balls. If Garen were to teach him something else, such as a spear, he wouldn't be able to do it at all. Garen was pleased to see David's attitude. Geniuses were rare, but David's attitude was even rarer. This would allow David to go further in the future. In a basement, for mercenaries of the Heavenly Wolf mercenary group were sitting on the ground. They had stayed in this basement for a few days. Although they wanted to leave, they didn't dare to do so due to the recent defense of Parent City. Interceptor drones could be seen patrolling the sky from time to time, which meant that the monolith star had increased its air blockade on Parent City. Why don't we contact the stowaways and spend more credits to leave? Ed suggested. The best thing to do now is to cut off all contact with the outside world and look for stowaways. Who knows if they will sell us out? Fisher disagreed. But we can't go on like this. Who knows when the lockdown will end? Aida said helplessly. Croc, what do you think we should do? Froman asked the silent Croc. Commander, something doesn't feel right. We should leave immediately, Croc said grimly. His words caused the expressions of the other mercenaries to tighten. Although Croc didn't speak much, he was born with an extremely strong sense of danger. It was this ability of his that allowed everyone to escape from danger many times. No one would not take Croc's words lightly, including Froman. "Get ready. Bring your equipment. We will move immediately." Froman waved his hand and decided. Just as everyone was packing up, Froman suddenly received a message on his identity bracelet. This made him very curious. Not many people knew about his identity bracelet. Who would contact him at this time? He opened his identity bracelet and saw the message. His expression changed drastically. "Commander, what's wrong?" Ed asked when he saw Froman's expression. "Our Heavenly Wolf battleship and all the mercenaries on it are done for." Froman gritted his teeth and said, "What?" Ed and Fisher stood up abruptly and shouted in shock. "Commander, where did the news come from?" Croc was still considered steady. He asked, "I don't know. It's an anonymous message. However, he said the location of the Heavenly Wolf battleship. It shouldn't be wrong." Froman's eyes were filled with unwillingness as he replied. The Heavenly Wolf mercenary group was his blood, sweat, and tears. It was also his hope for the future. He had been constantly accumulating wealth for the hope of improving himself. For the hope of improving himself, he would do anything. He led the mercenary group to do many dishonorable things. He did all the gray and black businesses because he was unwilling to accept it. Now that the Heavenly Wolf mercenary group was destroyed, he lost all hope of improving himself. His heart was filled with despair. "What should we do?" Ed asked Froman. Although the Heavenly Wolf mercenary group was gone, their main force was still there. Moreover, leaving Parent City and Planet Kai was the most important thing. "According to the news, we have been discovered. The government will most likely take action at noon. They will send at least 8 Kaji and a large number of aerial drones. In addition to the city's defense, there is no way for us to escape." Froman did not continue the conversation. Instead, he continued to talk about the worst situation. "No way for us to escape? Then why don't we go all out?" Fisher's eyes flashed fiercely as he said in a low voice, "Yes, let's go all out. We are in the city. The 4 of us are prepared. It won't be easy to catch us." Ed nodded in agreement. "All right then, prepare the armor. We will directly attack the house last time and capture David as a hostage. We will use him as a hostage to force us to leave." Froman decided to fight for a way out. Croc was a little hesitant. He did not want to trouble David again. However, he also knew that this was the only way out. Therefore, after struggling for a moment, he also made up his mind. Although this safe house looked no different from an ordinary house, there was actually a secret passage underground that connected to the underground pipeline network. The 4 mercenaries were wearing exoskeleton armor. They entered the underground pipeline network through the secret passage. Of course, there were sensors at every connection of the underground pipeline network. Therefore, they could not move long distances. However, the 4 mercenaries did not plan to move too far. All they needed to do was to reach a cargo hover car that was parked 100 meters away from the safe house. This was one of the escape routes that they had prepared long ago. As mercenaries, they would always arrange some escape routes everywhere. The bottom cover of the cargo hover car was opened. It was connected to an exit of the underground pipeline network. The 4 mercenaries then entered the cargo hover car through the exit. The exoskeleton armor that the mercenaries were wearing was 2 meters tall, black diamond exoskeleton armor. The shell of the level 2 Zerg was integrated into the armor. The vital parts of the chest and head were made of the same material that was used to make level 1 weapons. This ensured the safety of the user of the exoskeleton armor. The core of the exoskeleton armor was an enhancement converter that used krypton as the energy source. It could increase the user's strength by 10 times. In other words, Captain Froman, who had the strength of 2,000 kilograms, could exert 20,000 kilograms of strength with the help of the exoskeleton armor. With such strength, coupled with a Tier 1 weapon, he could easily destroy everything within the city. Of course, Parent City also had a city defense system. In addition, there were drones in the sky and Kaji who were guarding the city. Under the surveillance of Skynet, there were very few Kaji who dared to destroy the city. If it was not for the fact that he had nowhere else to go, Captain Froman would not have taken this step. It could be said that even if he managed to escape, he would have to carry the title of a wanted criminal. He would have to be careful of being betrayed at all times. At the same time, his hatred for David was also the reason why he made this decision. If it was not for David, his Heavenly Wolf mercenary group would not have been destroyed. With the cargo hover car as a cover, the 4 mercenaries could definitely launch a surprise attack on David. Then, they could capture David before Skynet found out and use him as a hostage to leave. They believed that the safety of the child of the scholar was much more important than the 4 mercenaries. At least on the surface. The cargo hover car moved towards Runka Street where David was at. It did not attract the attention of others. The people who were monitoring the safe house did not expect that the 4 mercenaries under their surveillance would suddenly make a move. Their plan would be completely exposed to the 4 mercenaries, and there would be a big hand manipulating the development of the situation in the dark. Chapter 34. Leader, if we attack directly like this, the interceptor drones in the sky will immediately attack us, and more reinforcements will be coming soon. Ed said aloud as he looked at the house not far away through the display in the car. Although he was not an electronic warfare engineer, he only needed a simple scanning device to find that the building in front of them was specially targeted by the interceptor drones in the sky. Once they attacked forcefully, the house would sound the alarm and a large number of interceptor drones would arrive. It would take time to break into the house and find David. The last time they entered David's house, they couldn't find David. In their opinion, David should have some special means of hiding. With the exoskeleton armor, they could completely tear down the interior of the house and find David. But it would take time. If the alarm was sounded, they would have less than a minute at most. It's okay. I have a way to disable the security system, Leader Froman said in a deep voice. As soon as he said that, the other 3 mercenaries looked at him. This is from the information provider. It should be David's enemy or someone who wants David dead. No matter what, as long as it benefits us, who cares? Leader Froman said with a sneer. David, who was practicing the storm hammer technique in the underground fitness room, suddenly his identity bracelet vibrated. Uncle Garen, we are in trouble. Someone is attacking the house. David looked at the pop-up prompt on the identity bracelet, asking whether to turn off the security system. He knew that the hidden permission program uploaded by the lease security company's supervisor was triggered. Garen looked at David's identity bracelet. When he saw the prompt asking whether to turn off the security system, he couldn't help but look at David curiously. He could guess that someone should have tampered with the security system of David's house. But the problem was that David found and reset the security system. From this point, it could be seen that David himself should have done some research on these things, and his level was not low. David, I will inform Father. Reinforcements will be here soon. Myron quickly operated the identity bracelet and said. David let Myron inform Mayor Bernard. Although he knew that Garen was very powerful, he believed that Mayor Bernard would be more reliable than Garen to mobilize people. David, you value your residents a lot, don't you? Galen suddenly asked. Uncle Garen, this is what my mother left me. David had received the memories of his predecessor and merged the mother in his memory with his mother in his previous life. Therefore, he still attached great importance to a house with a commemorative meaning. Myron, you stay here. David, come with me. Garen grabbed David and lifted David into the air as if he were weightless. Without waiting for Myron's reply, he sped up and headed for the tunnel. Myron wanted to give chase, but seeing Galen's speed and remembering Galen's orders, he decided to stay. David could feel the wind whistling in his ears. He had never thought that a human could reach such a level of speed. This was not like running on an unobstructed track. To be able to maintain such speed in a building and perfectly avoid objects, this was not something that could be achieved with normal speed. Captain Froman, who was in the truck outside, operated the identity bracelet and sent a string of codes to the house not far away. Then he waited for a response, but to his surprise, there was no response. The security system was not turned off. Could it be that the anonymous person lied to me? Captain Froman thought to himself as he judged his next course of action. At this moment, 5 figures wearing silver-white exoskeleton armor jumped down from the void and surrounded the truck. Damn it! Why is there an aircraft with a stealth device here? These Kaji have been protecting David, Captain Froman exclaimed. Every aircraft with a stealth device was not something that ordinary people could own. Although this kind of stealth was not real and was only an optical simulation, it was very difficult to detect an aircraft when it was stationary. This kind of stealth device was normally used to protect the safety of important people. It could be deployed with a Kaji at any time. However, David was only the child of a national knight. Even the title itself was only an honorary title. It was not enough to warrant such a level of security. In addition, the white exoskeleton armor worn by the 5 Kaji were all streamer exoskeleton armor. This exoskeleton armor specialty was that it was faster and could increase the user's speed by 10%. The streamer exoskeleton armor was not circulated outside. Only the Federation government and some special people could buy it. It was faster than the black diamond exoskeleton armor and had more grade 1 material to protect it. These gave the Kaji a huge advantage before the battle. "Fight!" Captain Froman shouted. He knew that it was useless to say anything now. Only by fighting with all his might would he have a chance to live. He was a peak-level Kaji. He pulled out 2 long swords from his back and swung them out at the same time. The 2 swords flashed with a faint blue light and cut open the cargo hovercar's outer shell. He jumped out of it. Behind him was Croc, who was in the process of connecting a 3-section round stick into a spear. Ed was holding a large shield single-handedly from his back. Lastly, Fisher was holding a double-edged great axe in his hand. The 4 of them formed a combat team, but they did not have any long-range attacks. This was also why they were worried about the interceptor drones. However, they were surrounded by the 5 Kaji, so they could only fight. As mercenaries, they were used to fighting. Although they were surrounded, this only served to stimulate their fighting spirit. "Be careful, don't destroy this house." At this time, Galen grabbed David and appeared outside the house. He put down David and reminded the 5 Kaji. "Yes, sir," the 5 Kaji replied. They took out their weapons from the equipment slots on their backs. Their weapons were very uniform. They were all war hammers, but the color of their surface was different from the war hammers David had seen before. It was the same color as Captain Froman's swords. The expressions of Captain Froman and the other 3 mercenaries changed at the same time. David did not know, but the 4 mercenaries knew what this color meant. For example, Croc's spear, Ed's shield, and Fisher's giant axe. These 3 weapons had a faint fluorescent glow on them. This was the color of grade 1 materials. However, the faint blue glow on Captain Froman's 2 swords was the color of grade 2 materials. Captain Froman had paid a huge price to get his 2 swords. Grade 2 materials required the fusion of the teeth and claws of a grade 2 Zerg and other precious materials. Even if it was a level 2 Zerg with the weight of its teeth and claws, many level 2 Zergs would be needed to forge a weapon. Captain Froman's 2 swords were considered light weapons, so the grade 2 materials required were extremely limited. Even so, he had spent a lot of his connections and credits to get them. Since he was an expert in swordsmanship and was a peak Kaji, plus most of his missions were against non-ARGs, he chose to use grade 2 swords. However, the 5 Kaji in front of him were wearing streamer exoskeleton armor and wielding grade 2 heavy warhammers. In terms of equipment, they had a crushing advantage over the 4 mercenaries. "Who are you? Let us go, and I can compensate you." Captain Froman held his 2 swords in front of him and gestured to his companions behind him as he asked Galen, "How did you control the degree of shutdown of the security system?" Without waiting for Galen to answer, David quickly asked. He was extremely confused. According to his judgment, these mercenaries should have attacked him because of an accident. No one would have known beforehand that the T3 sniper assistance equipment would fall into his hands, not to mention that these mercenaries killed Amos, who was monitoring him. He always thought that the person behind the scenes was the one who used Leeson Security Company to set up a backdoor in the security system. However, the ones who triggered the backdoor were these mercenaries. "There's nothing to hide. We received an anonymous message, including the fact that the safe house we were hiding in was discovered, which led us to capture you. At the same time, it provided the method to disable the security system. All of this was provided by your enemy. I don't know his identity. In order to escape, Captain Froman directly revealed the situation of the anonymous person. He would not keep it a secret for someone who led them into a trap. If he could use this information to gain some favor from the other party, it would be worth it. Chapter 35. Uncle Galen, I have no more questions. You can make the decision. David got the answer he wanted. Although he was not satisfied, he knew that it was the enemy behind this. He turned to Galen and said, he knew that even though Galen took good care of him, he had no right to interfere in matters between the Kaji. Froman, Croc, Ed, Fisher. Galen called out the names of the 4 surrounded mercenaries one by one. Then he said in a deep voice, Knights of the Nation are not to be humiliated. This is the law of the Federation. The Federation needs to use your blood as a warning to others. After saying this, Galen waved his hand in the air. 5 streamer exoskeleton armors accelerated instantly. 5 war hammers glowing with a faint blue light struck towards the 4 celestial wolf mercenaries. David's eyes lit up when he saw this. The 5 Kaji exoskeleton armors were all using the Storm Warhammer technique. The Storm Warhammer technique was a technique used to train warhammers, but at the same time, it could also be used in battle. Especially in a group battle like this, when 5 Kaji used the Storm Warhammer technique at the same time, the effect would be much stronger than if it was a one-on-one battle. Ed, defend! Captain Froman shouted. At the same time, he quickly retreated and hid behind Ed's shield. Fisher, who was holding a double-edged axe, blocked the back and dealt with the 2 Kaji attacking from behind. Croc stood behind Fisher, side by side with Captain Froman, supporting both sides at any time. With their rich battle experience, they knew very well that using the Black King Kong exoskeleton armors and the Streamer exoskeleton armors to compete in speed was definitely the worst choice. In addition, they also needed to know the true strength of the enemy to make the most appropriate response. Therefore, they chose to defend at the first moment. The 5 spinning blue war hammers had already reached the mercenaries. 2 of the war hammers hit Ed's shield and made 2 clashing sounds almost at the same time. Ed felt a huge force on his arm. The exoskeleton armor on his body made a strange noise. He used his strong body and his control of the shield to transfer most of the force to the stone ground under his feet. This caused his feet to sink into the stone ground, and at the same time, 2 dents appeared on the surface of his shield. The level 2 war hammer struck the level 1 shield. If it wasn't for the fact that the shield in Ed's hand was particularly heavy, this strike would have shattered the shield. Even so, the shield in his hand couldn't hold on for long. Captain, they have at least 1,500 kilograms of strength. AI did not have time to pay attention to his weapon. He said in a hurried voice. Just now, he had felt a huge impact of 15,000 kilograms. At this moment, Captain Froman was using his 2 swords to block a flowing light Kaji. His 2 swords flashed and successfully forced the opponent back. In the battle between the Kaji and the Kaji, Captain Froman, who used 2 light weapons, had a huge advantage. However, because the other party's warhammers were specially trained, although he had the upper hand, he couldn't defeat the other party in a short period of time. At the back, Fisher's double-edged axe was completely in a desperate stance. He didn't block at all. Just like that, he wanted to exchange life for life with a flowing light Kaji. How could the flowing light Kaji fight with his life on the line when he had the advantage in numbers? As soon as they came into contact, he used his war hammer to block Fisher's axe and retreated. The last flowing light Kaji couldn't even get close to him. He was blocked by Croc's spear. Croc's spear was like a poisonous snake. It constantly stabbed at Fisher's back, attacking the weak points of the flowing light Kaji's armor. If the flowing light Kaji wanted to get close to Croc, he had to attack Fisher first. If he attacked Fisher, he would be threatened by the spear. The 2 flowing light Kaji in front didn't expect that they couldn't defeat this group of mercenaries even after joining forces. The 2 flowing light Kaji didn't continue to attack. Instead, they retreated with the other Kaji and prepared for the second round of attacks. They still lack combat experience. Galen shook his head and said softly. In fact, the 5 flowing light Kaji couldn't be blamed. Their opponents were all Zergs. They were completely different from the mercenaries who fought Kaji every day. Although the mercenaries' exoskeleton armor and weapons were slightly inferior, their combat experience made up for the gap. Of course, the outcome of the battle didn't need to be considered. The 5 flowing light Kaji had an absolute advantage in combat power. Defeating the mercenaries was only a matter of time. David watched the battle on the battlefield intently. Although it was only a short round of contact, the impact of the powerful force deeply shocked him. For example, the stone ground in Perrin City was made of the strongest stones on the Boulder Star. The Boulder Star was called the Boulder Star because it was full of hard stones. These stones could withstand normal explosions, but when a 9 Kaji came into contact with them, a large area of the ground was damaged. David also saw 2 deep dents on the level 1 shield in Ed's hand. That was the legendary level 1 heavy-duty defensive weapon of the Kaji. What kind of force was needed to make such a dent on the shield? He couldn't help but look at his house again. He thought what Galen said before. It turned out that Galen asked if the house was important to him because he didn't want the Kaji's battle to damage his house. He had always thought that his house was extremely safe and sturdy. However, in the eyes of these Kaji, it was probably as fragile as a piece of paper. When he saw the true power of this world, David's heart was burning with passion. At the same time, he also knew that as long as he worked hard, he would also become one of these Kaji. Captain Froman, who was still surrounded, had a serious expression. He already knew the combat power of the 5 Kaji. It was because he knew the opponent's combat power that he was even more desperate. The strength of the 5 flowing light warriors had reached 1,500 kilograms. They were definitely soldiers trained by the same organization. They had the same training, the same exoskeleton armor, the same level 2 warhammer, and the same attacking style. Although the 4 of them had forced the 5 Kaji to retreat, he knew that it was only because the opponent didn't want to fight to the death with them. Everyone, let's fight to the death. Create an opportunity for me. I will go and capture the commander and David. Captain Froman said softly, Captain, after becoming a mercenary, I don't care about my life anymore. I will open a path for you. Ed said with a bitter smile as blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. He was defending against the Kaji. His speed was very slow, so he was the least likely to escape from the Kaji. In the current situation, this was the only chance to fight to the death. Let's fight. Fisher looked at the gap on his beloved axe and agreed. Croc didn't say anything. He pressed on the side of his exoskeleton armor and injected a tube of cell activator into his body. His eyes quickly turned red. Although the name cell activator sounded nice, it was one of the rare contraband items in the black market. Once it was administered, it would directly consume the user's lifespan. It could greatly improve the user's strength, speed, and other aspects. The scariest thing about cell activator was that the user would lose all sense of pain after using it. The user would be in a state of explosive power, completely turning into a killing machine. It could be said that Croc was using his actions to show that he was going all out. Captain Froman glanced at Croc and sighed inwardly. This old subordinate of his had made such a choice so that he could escape. Ed also pressed on the side of his body and injected the cell activator into his body. His eyes also turned red. Only Fisher hesitated for a moment. Although cell activator could rapidly increase one's combat strength, the consequence was permanent damage to the body. It would be difficult to increase it in the future. However, when he thought of the current situation, he activated the injection device in the exoskeleton armor and injected a tube of cell activator into his body. The 5 Kaji also realized that something was amiss. They looked at each other and brandished their warhammers again. The 5 figures attacked the 4 mercenaries like a hurricane. At that moment, apart from Captain Froman, the heat from the other 3 mercenaries almost penetrated the black diamond exoskeleton armor. They roared like beasts. It wasn't that Captain Froman didn't want to risk his life, but with his body at its peak, the improvement he received was extremely limited even if he was injected with cell activator. Chapter 36. The second round of battle began. Just like before, the flowing light Kaji charged into the formation of the four mercenaries with their advantage in numbers. Die! Ed roared. His body was completely pressed against the shield. With the exoskeleton armor as the driving force and the burst of cell activator, his forward speed was far beyond his usual speed. The two flowing light Kaji in front of him didn't stop at all. They took advantage of the momentum and smashed the two warhammers on the shield. Cracks appeared on the surface of the shield, but it wasn't enough to stop Ed's charge. This time, the two flowing light Kaji didn't get the upper hand. Their bodies shook at the same time, and their bodies were forced to stop in place by the reaction force. Aida's eyes flashed with madness. If he had stopped, he would have been able to disperse the attacks of the two stream of light warriors. However, he had forcibly taken the brunt of the attacks. Even with the shield blocking, he still spat out blood. However, since he had lost the sense of pain, he didn't care about the injuries on his body. He forcibly charged toward the two flowing light Kaji. Under his charge, the other mercenaries also charged in his direction. Croc's spear had the longest attack range. The faintly glowing spearhead stabbed the two flowing light Kaji in the left and right at almost the same time, hitting the two Kaji in the chest. The first-level material defensive armor at the chest area of the streamer exoskeleton armor protected the two streamer exoskeleton warriors. Although their bodies were sent flying backward and blood gushed out of their mouths, they did not suffer any fatal injuries. Most of the impact from the two stabs was transmitted into the exoskeleton armor. The exoskeleton armor itself could reduce the impact, and with the protection of the first-level material defensive armor, the two flowing light Kaji only suffered bone fractures in their chests and blood surging. After they were sent flying, they immediately activated the healing potion. The cold potion was injected into their bodies, quickly repairing the broken bones and calming their blood. However, they also lost their encirclement of the mercenaries. The three flowing light Kaji in the other three directions wanted to chase after the four mercenaries, but they were blocked by Fisher alone. With just a touch, Fisher's giant axe was smashed to pieces by the second-level warhammer. At the same time, he was hit several times in the shoulder and back. As a result, one of the flowing light Kaji was hit by his giant axe and was slightly injured. The other two Kaji were also blocked. The black exoskeleton armor on Fisher's body was broken from the shoulder to the back. White bone fragments could be seen clearly. In just an instant, Fisher was severely injured, but he was still laughing maniacally. He was still swinging the huge axe in his hand as if he wasn't injured at all. The two flowing light Kaji were frightened by his condition. With such injuries, he should have been paralyzed on the ground. Fisher and Ed's desperate attacks, as well as Croc's attacks, were not in vain. Captain Froman rushed towards Garin and David like a ghost. There was no longer any soldier in front of him that could stop him. "Uncle Garin, let's retreat," David hurriedly shouted when he saw Captain Froman rushing over. He did not expect the battlefield to change so quickly. The flowing light Kaji's advantage was broken by the mercenaries in the blink of an eye. Now, they were rushing towards them. Garin pulled David behind him gently and stretched out his right hand. At this moment, his right hand was already wrapped in dark blue metal. Captain Froman looked at Garin, who was getting closer and closer. He was full of hope for victory. Garin was not wearing exoskeleton armor. Based on the fact that he had 5 streamer warriors, Garin was definitely a big shot. With such a hostage, in addition to David, he had the absolute confidence to leave the Boulder Star. He could even use this as a hostage to obtain a large ransom. His hope of improving himself appeared again. This made him speed up. In his eyes, Garin and David were a lot of credits. He could get them with just a stretch of his hand. But when he got closer, he saw the disdain on Garin's face. It was a look of disdain for someone of a lower level. Captain Froman was very familiar with this look. He would show it from time to time. As a subversive Kaji, he was the most powerful among the Kaji. With 2 level 2 long swords, he had the capital to look down on the other Kaji. But why would Garin, who was not wearing exoskeleton armor, show such a look? Could it be that they still had a trump card? But at this distance, Even if they had a trump card, it would not help them. When Captain Froman arrived in front of Garen, he turned his long sword around and tried to grab Garen with 3 fingers. Garen moved. Captain Froman was very careful. He was not being careful because he did not want Garen and David to get hurt. These two were their hostages and also a large number of credits. Garen's arm disappeared from David's sight. Garen was so fast that even with David's 3-0 constitution, he could not see the movement of Garen's arm. "Captain, be careful." Croc, who was behind Captain Froman, suddenly felt a chill down his spine. He could not help but shout out a warning, but it was all too late. Captain Froman was still in the middle of grabbing Garen. Meanwhile, a hand had pierced through the level 1 material armor on his chest. The blue glow on the hand indicated that it was a level 2 material. But how could such a close-fitting armor be so powerful? The reason why exoskeleton armor was so powerful was because it used krypton as an energy source to strengthen the converter. This device took up a large area of the exoskeleton armor. Of course, David was the only one here who did not understand. The shock in Captain Froman's eyes showed that he knew. Captain Froman looked at the hole in his chest and the hand that had reached inside to grab his heart. He knew that he was done for. "You're a transcendent." Before he could finish, Galen crushed his heart with his bare hands. The glow in Captain Froman's eyes disappeared. Without Kaji's control, the exoskeleton armor lost its power. Garen threw Captain Froman's corpse aside. He still used one hand to grab the spear that was already in front of him. The one who stabbed with the spear was Croc. But this was also the last attack of his life. Garen grabbed the spear and shook it lightly. The armor on Croc's hands and the hands that were protected inside trembled violently. The bones in Croc's hands were instantly broken into several pieces. When Croc let go of the spear, Garen stabbed the handle of the spear into Croc's chest in the opposite direction. The tremendous force caused the level 1 armor to be torn apart like a piece of paper. Croc's heart was pierced through by the spear handle. He used his useless hands to hold on to the spear handle in his heart. His eyes were filled with yearning for life, but also a sense of liberation from the world. His story disappeared with his death. Ed howled like a wounded wolf. Under the effect of the cell activator, he did not fear death and rushed towards Garen with his shield. Garen's expression did not change. He reached out his hand again. The blue right hand was like the sharpest weapon in the world. It pierced through the shield again and through Ed's heart. In the end, Fitcher was distracted by Garen's massacre. He forgot about the enemy for a moment and was hit in the head by a warhammer. Even with the cell activator and the level 1 material helmet, it could not stop the dizziness from being hit in the head. Then, several flowing light Kaji continued to hit him, smashing his head into pieces like a watermelon. David was not shocked by the cruel battle in front of him. He could sense that the shadow attendant was absorbing the 4 souls. The shadow attendant's soul was giving him a comfortable feeling. "You guys collect the spoils. Also, get the local police to clean up this area." Garen ordered the 5 flowing light Kaji in a deep voice. "Yes, sir." The 5 flowing light Kaji bowed. "Go back and increase your training. You have disappointed me." Garen waved his hand and said. The 5 flowing light Kaji were ashamed. They had messed up such an advantageous battle. They had the advantage in terms of equipment and numbers, but they had suffered a great loss in front of the 4 mercenaries. Chapter 37. David, I thought you would throw up after seeing such a scene. I didn't expect you to be so strong. Galen turned to David and said with a smile, "Uncle Galen, I've seen worse scenes." David recalled the day after he arrived in this world. He saw almost 100 broken corpses. After that, he was no longer scared by other corpses. "Pick one of these spoils." Galen was stunned for a moment. He thought of David's recent experience and changed the topic. "Really?" David was overjoyed. He asked in disbelief. The spoils here were all real Kaji equipment. Each and every one of them was extremely precious. Don't even think about Kaji's exoskeleton armor. All the exoskeleton armors here are damaged. Besides, when you become an official Kaji, you will have your own exoskeleton armor. The exoskeleton armors in non-university are much better than these. Galen reminded him with a smile when he saw David looking at the black adamantine exoskeleton armor. David smiled embarrassedly. He then looked at the two swords on the ground that originally belonged to Captain Froman. Among all the spoils here, only these two long swords were different in color. They were the same color as Flowing Light Kaji's war hammer. They must be good stuff. David, you really know how to choose. All the spoils here combined are not as valuable as these two level 2 long swords. But it's because I promised you, Galen said as he shook his head and picked up the two level 2 long swords from ground. He handed the level 2 long swords to David. David hesitated for a moment before accepting them. In fact, if it weren't for David's unimaginable talent, Galen would never have given David such a precious weapon. Not only were they spoils of war, but they were also level 2 weapons. If an ordinary Kaji used a long sword, it would be irresponsible to himself and his companions, just like what Galen had taught David before. However, Galen knew that with David's mastery of the warhammer, he would become a powerful Kaji once he became an official Kaji. For a genius like David, learning how to use a long sword would not require too much effort. Mastering one more weapon would also be beneficial to David's growth. Galen had seen Kaji lose most of his combat power on the battlefield because his weapon was damaged. It was not easy to find a suitable weapon on the battlefield. Mastering one more weapon would increase one's chances of survival. David, I'll help you investigate the problem with your house's security system, Galen said in a deep voice when he thought of David's safety and the program in the security system. David nodded. He wanted to tell Galen about the situation he had, but this matter involved his stepmother Bertha's father, Mr. Stefan. Even if Galen was a good friend of his father Hans, David did not want Galen to get involved. However, it would be good for Galen to investigate lease insecurity with his influence. He had to be careful even when he went out now. Although he did not know how much power Galen had, the Five-Light Kaji and Mayor Bernard's attitude towards him spoke volumes about Galen's high status. To be called a big shot by Myron, Galen's status was far higher than the mayor's. This scabbard is for you. Galen took a scabbard from the black exoskeleton armor on the back of Captain Froman's corpse and handed it over. Thank you, Uncle Galen. David took the scabbard and put the two level 2 long swords into the scabbard. The scabbard's exterior was made from the skin of an unknown creature. He did not know what material the interior was made of. The two terrifyingly sharp, level 2 long swords were firmly secured in the scabbard. Remember, the long sword is only a support in battle. I don't want the long sword to affect your mastery of the war hammer, Galen reminded. At that moment, 4 transport aircrafts approached. At the same time, 5 interceptor drones appeared in the sky. 8 Kaji jumped down from the 4 transport aircrafts. These Kaji had all kinds of exoskeleton armor on their bodies. David, a good exoskeleton armor represents your strength. It also ensures your safety. So, when you choose an exoskeleton armor in the future, you better choose carefully. Be clear about your own characteristics and choose the most suitable exoskeleton armor for you, Galen said softly to David. David knew that Galen was reminding him through the exoskeleton armor of the 8 Kaji. He quickly nodded to show that he understood. With your current situation, it shouldn't be a problem for you to enter non-university. There are many exoskeleton armors there. If you need any help, contact me at any time. Galen continued. He was no longer just helping his good friend's son. Instead, he was investing in him. David glanced at Galen's right arm. The armor that was exposed during the battle had disappeared. It was as if it was never there. Although he was extremely curious, he knew that if Galen did not want to talk about it, it would be useless for him to ask. On the other hand, the 8 local Kaji began to take over the scene. More police officers had arrived. The scene became lively. Let's go back. Galen did not like this scene. He said to David. David wanted to go back as soon as possible to see what benefits the shadow attendant had obtained. He followed Galen back. As witnesses and participants, the police were supposed to take statements from them. However, none of the police officers stopped them. Officer Bob stood among the police officers. His eyes were shining. He knew David's identity, but he did not expect David to cause such a big commotion. Moreover, there were 5 flowing light Kaji guards in David's residence. This was beyond his imagination. He thought that it would be in his interest to continue befriending David in the future. "David, what's going on outside?" As soon as they returned to the underground fitness room, Myron quickly ran to David and asked. He was not worried at all. With Galen around, no matter how big the trouble, it would not be a problem. However, for Galen to deal with it personally, it must be something big. During the short time he stayed in the underground fitness room, his heart was filled with curiosity. The 4 mercenaries who tried to attack me last time came again. Uncle Galen took care of them. David replied simply, "Those 4 Kaji mercenaries. Why didn't I go and watch the battle between Uncle Galen and Kaji?" Myron slapped his thigh in frustration. Galen seemed to be in a good mood after killing 3 Kaji. He ignored Myron's words. Instead, he was communicating with someone through his identity bracelet. "David, what's this?" Myron asked when he saw the scabbard in David's hand. He reached out to grab it, but David dodged. "This is a trophy Uncle Galen gave me," David replied while holding the scabbard. "Let me have a look. I'll leave the 2 war hammers behind. Considering our friendship, please let me have a look." Myron's curiosity was aroused again. He kept begging. David glanced at the 2 war hammers on the ground. They were not even grade 1 weapons. They were just practice war hammers mixed with a large number of grade 1 insect shells. They were completely useless in a real battle. However, seeing Myron's expression, David still handed over the scabbard in his hand. Myron held the scabbard in one hand and pulled out the sword in the other. As soon as he pulled it out, he discovered that it was a pair of swords. However, the hilts were strangely shaped. When combined, they looked like a single sword hilt. "Be careful, don't hurt yourself," David reminded. Myron did not pull out the swords completely. When he saw the faint blue light, he stopped what he was doing. This is a pair of grade 2 swords." He stuttered. His tone was full of disbelief. In his family's environment, he naturally knew what a grade 2 weapon represented. There were only a few grade 2 weapons in the entire parent city. Moreover, they were all owned by the powerful Kaji who had the support of powerful financial groups. Yet, Galen had casually given 2 grade 2 swords to David. How could he not be shocked by such a generous gift? Myron carefully examined the swords. This was his first time observing a grade 2 weapon at such a close distance. The faint blue light intoxicated him. He had learned how to use a sword before. He even had the urge to ask David for one. However, he was very clear about the value of a grade 2 weapon. No matter how good their relationship was, Galen would never give away a grade 2 weapon. Chapter 38. That's not right. Didn't Uncle Garen say that we can't use swords? Myron suddenly thought of something and asked. "I don't know. You should ask Uncle Garen." David shrugged and took back the sword from Myron. "Myron, go practice well. Don't compare yourself to David. Just be yourself," Garen said in a deep voice as he came to the 2 of them. Hearing the familiar reply, Myron could only lower his head and pick up a war hammer from the ground and begin practicing. David felt that Garen's words seemed to have dealt a blow to Myron again. "David, everyone from Leeson Security Company has been taken away for investigation. The company has also been sealed. All we have to do is wait for news," Garen said to David. Just now, he had contacted someone to start investigating Leeson Security Company. This kind of company with no background was completely powerless in the face of an official investigation. "Uncle Garen, sorry to trouble you," David said gratefully. "David, grow up quickly. Uncle might need your help in the future," Garen said with a smile. In David's ears, this was just a joke from Garen. However, in Garen's heart, he was telling the truth. Today, Parent City was a little chaotic. The 9 Kajis were fighting. The loud sounds of the battle made everyone nearby tremble in fear. Fortunately, it didn't take long before the police came to deal with it. However, not long after, the largest security company in Parent City, Leeson Security Company, was surrounded by a large number of police officers. Several Kajis were even sent to accompany them. Everyone in Leeson Security Company, from the general manager to the employees, and even the cleaners were taken away. All the photon computers in the company were also taken away. After the police left, the place was sealed off by Skynet. The red screen showed that Leeson Security Company was a restricted area. Anyone who entered illegally would be tracked by Skynet. David practiced the storm hammer technique in the underground fitness room for a day. Although he wanted to go back to the bedroom to check on the shadow attendant's gains, Garen valued him greatly and asked him to practice repeatedly. By the time it was 5 in the afternoon, David and Myron were both covered in sweat. They had also used up a lot of level 1 strength and meat. Of course, the gap between the two did not shrink with the passage of time. After a day of practice, coupled with the stimulation of watching Kaji fight, David's true mastery of the Warhammer had almost reached 50% proficiency. It was estimated that in another day, he would be able to reach the level of the dead Amos, the security chief of the Chester Hotel. Myron, on the other hand, was still a beginner. He had only learned half of the Storm Warhammer technique. If not for David's comparison, it would have been a good result. All right, that's all for today. Garen clapped his hands as he looked at the exhausted duo. That's great. My arms feel like they're going to break, Myron said as he placed his warhammer on the ground. Myron, your aptitude isn't very good, so you have to practice more, Garen reminded Myron. Myron was stunned when he heard this. His aptitude wasn't very good, and this evaluation was like a critical hit to him. However, when he saw David beside him, he immediately calmed down. Uncle Garen must be comparing me to David. He must be. He kept repeating in his heart. David, the lead from Leeson Security Company has been cut off. Manager Jeeson, who was serving you, has committed suicide in the police station, Garen said to David. His voice was filled with dissatisfaction with the police system. Everyone knew that it was impossible to commit suicide in the police station. There were surveillance cameras and policemen on duty. Manager Jeeson wouldn't commit suicide so easily. However, this was not Garen's home ground. His people couldn't find anything here. They could only go through the local police system. It would be difficult to find anything after the lead was cut off. The rest of the staff of Leeson Security Company, including their general manager, didn't know about the security system in your house. However, since it was done by the people of Leeson Security Company, we have to make them pay a price. When Garen was speaking, David looked like a bandit. I've left the main server of Leeson Security Company. Someone will send it over later. I know you've learned the relevant knowledge, so the main server should be able to help you. However, the things you've learned are a bit heterogeneous. Don't lose your focus. Physical skills and techniques are your foundation. Garen continued. Thank you, Uncle Garen. David couldn't remember how many times he had thanked Garen. However, when he knew what he was going to get, he couldn't hold back his excitement. The main server of a security company was at least at the level of a small server. A server of this level was much more powerful than his K-2 military electronic countermeasure machine. At the very least, when he attacked a target from a distance, he could use a real server. At the end of the day, the K-2 military electronic countermeasure machine was only portable combat equipment. It gathered a large number of ready-made attack programs and military-grade electronic signals. However, in terms of calculation, it was still far from being at the level of a server. Garen smiled. It was just a casual gesture. Leeson Security Company had to thank him for letting go. Otherwise, Leeson Security Company would have gone bankrupt in an instant. After dinner, Myron dragged his tired body back to the bedroom on the first floor. Under such training, he had long lost the mood to go out and play. Garen left the house and went out to deal with his own business. When David returned to the bedroom, he immediately called the shadow attendant to his side and pressed a hand on the shadow attendant. Before he could sense the knowledge ball inside the shadow attendant, he was enveloped by a warm energy. It wasn't accurate to say that he was enveloped. It was more accurate to say that his soul was enveloped by the warm energy. A comfortable feeling rose from his soul, just like what the shadow attendant had transmitted to him. After a day of exhaustion and the comfortable feeling in his soul, he couldn't help but fall into a deep sleep. When he woke up again, the time on the ID bracelet was already 10 o'clock at night. Shadow Attendant, show me my attribute panel. He once again pressed his hand on the Shadow Attendant and ordered. In his attribute panel, he saw Spirit 341. His spirit increased by 0. For, with the increase in spirit, when he recalled the Storm Warhammer technique in his mind, all kinds of new insights appeared. He saw the Warhammer Mastery, 82% proficiency, change on the attribute panel in front of him. It changed from Warhammer Mastery, 82% proficiency, to Warhammer Mastery, 83% proficiency. In other words, through the understanding of the day's practice, he surpassed the knowledge of Warhammer Mastery brought by Amos and had his own Warhammer Mastery knowledge. Maybe I'm really a genius, David said with some narcissism. Amos had experienced countless battles to achieve such results, but he only thought about it and increased it by 1%. How could he not be proud of it? However, when he turned to think about electronic warfare, he didn't have any insights for a long time, and there was no increase in proficiency. He was a little unconvinced and tried Heavy Axe Mastery, 33% entry level, and Body Arts, 1% proficiency. Relying on thinking alone wouldn't increase even by 1%. He thought of the Storm Warhammer technique taught by Galen, and the process of watching the 5 flowing light Kaji use the Storm Warhammer technique against the enemy. He couldn't help but shake his head. It turned out that the 1% increase in Warhammer Mastery proficiency came from this. Amos didn't have the opportunity to learn the Storm Warhammer technique. His Warhammer Mastery improvement was completely obtained in actual combat, but David had the Storm Warhammer technique, so naturally his knowledge would surpass Amos. After finding the reason, David focused his attention on the Shadow Attendant's body. He saw 4 new knowledge light balls. Among the extra knowledge light balls, there were actually 2 yellow knowledge light balls. Moreover, they were the kind that had a very strong color within the yellow light balls. The other 2 knowledge light balls were orange, which should only be the proficiency level knowledge light balls. These 4 knowledge light balls also proved that he was now 100% sure that each soul could only extract 1 knowledge light ball. He focused his attention on the 4 knowledge light balls, and the attributes of the 4 knowledge light balls were revealed. Longsword Mastery, 80% proficiency. Spear Mastery, 99% proficiency. Shield Mastery, 50% proficiency. Heavy Axe Mastery, 70% proficiency. Chapter 39. Through the attributes of the 4 knowledge balls, David could tell that these were the abilities that the 4 mercenaries were proficient in. What he didn't expect was that Longsword Mastery had reached 80% proficiency, while Spear Mastery had reached 99% proficiency. Needless to say, Longsword Mastery, 80% proficiency, was the ability of Captain Froman, while Croc's ability was Spear Mastery, 99% proficiency. Even if David didn't understand Kaji, he could guess that Croc had a lot of secrets. However, Croc was already dead, and the secrets were scattered with the wind. However, through these 2 abilities, David could also see how terrifying Garen was. 2 powerful Kaji with proficiency level combat skills were like babies in front of Garen. They couldn't fight back at all and were easily killed by Garen. David couldn't help but think of the 2 words transcendent that Captain Froman said before he died. Unfortunately, Captain Froman couldn't continue, but this also made David have some guesses about Kaji. These are still some ways away from me, he muttered. It had been a day since the last time he fused with the knowledge balls, so he could fuse with new knowledge balls again. This time, he had a lot more choices. The mastery of a variety of weapons included most of the weapons commonly used by soldiers. Especially after obtaining 2 level 2 longswords, he was extremely tempted by the mastery of longsword, 80% mastery. However, in the end, he still decided to fuse with snipe, 20% proficiency today. He already had Warhammer Mastery, 83% proficiency, in close combat, so he already had close combat abilities. He had always been envious of long-range attacks like snipe. It was safe, efficient, and powerful. This was the Snipe Kaji. The Snipe Kaji who was far away from the battlefield was the grim reaper of the enemies on the battlefield, but also the guardian of his comrades. In David's memory, His predecessor had a special feeling for the sniper Kaji. From what David could see now, it actually came from his father, Hans. Hans was a sniper Kaji. Due to the previous owner's ambiguous attitude towards his father, Hans, the previous owner had transferred his love for his father to the profession of sniping Kaji. His predecessor had wanted to test his sniping talent after entering university, but he was killed before he could do so. Furthermore, he had been randomly absorbing and fusing light orbs for the past few days, so he didn't have time to practice them. Most of his time had been occupied by practicing the Storm Warhammer technique. David took a deep breath and calmed his mind. Then he controlled the shadow attendant to transfer the sniping, 20% proficiency, knowledge ball into his body. In an instant, he found himself at the edge of the battlefield, crawling on top of a large rock. In front of him was a super long sniper rifle that was more than 4 meters long. Most of the length of the sniper rifle was the length of the barrel. David, who had experienced the fusion of light orbs a few times, was used to not being able to control his body, but being able to receive every feeling of his body, including the process of judgment and analysis of the enemy. On the battlefield, 5 Kaji formed a combat team. The 2 Kaji at the front used 2 large shields to block the front. The shields in their hands were constantly hitting the spiky Caliceri at the shortest distance possible in order to increase the distance between them. David's atlas had a description of the spiky Caliceri. In addition to their 2 sharp claws, they also had 6 tentacles with poisonous thorns on their backs. They could perform high-speed and close-range attacks. Their combat power was above average among the level 1 Zergs. There were as many as 5 spiky Caliceri. It could be said that in a battle like this, without the help of the defense, the 5 Kaji would definitely fail. The only uncertainty was the sniping Kaji lying on top of a large rock in the distance. Behind the 2 Kaji wielding warhammers jumped out of the defensive circle and attacked the spiky Caliceri. Based on David's mastery of the warhammers, this level was above 50% proficiency. Unfortunately, the 2 warhammer Kaji were only able to push back 2 spiky Caliceri and did not achieve any results. This was normal. In front of 5 spiky Caliceri, the 2 warhammer Kaji did not dare to be too far away from the defending Kaji. After the explosion, the warhammer Kaji retreated back to the large shield, while the spear Kaji forced the spiky Caliceri to stop their attacks. Although the battle seemed to be going back and forth, the spiky Caliceri had not used their 6 poisonous thorns. At this moment, the spiky Caliceri were probably still toying with their prey. At this moment, David's normal field of vision was replaced by the sniper scope's field of vision. This was the T3 sniper auxiliary sniper device he was familiar with. However, this T3 sniper auxiliary sniper device installed on the super long sniper rifle displayed more information. In an instant, David received the analysis plan of the sniping Kaji. It included the analysis and judgment of the air temperature, humidity, wind direction, distance, etc. The sniping Kaji's hand gently pulled the sniper rifle. David understood that it was changing the ammunition. The sniping Kaji could use a normal sniper bullet with a silencer to attract the Zerg from afar. This allowed the Kaji team to only face 1 Zerg at a time, increasing the combat efficiency and survival rate of the Kaji team. When a sniping Kaji needed to launch a lethal attack on the Zergs, it would need to switch to a special ammunition. For example, the spiky Caliceri in front of them were level 1 Zergs. Therefore, the special ammunition needed to snipe Kaji had to be at least level 1 material. This kind of precious bullet was very expensive. Although it was not as heavy as a level 1 weapon, it could not be wasted. There were not many opportunities to snipe Kaji because if they wanted to attack the spiky Caliceri, they could not use the silencer mode. Although the silencer mode could reduce the sound of the gunshot, it also greatly reduced the damage of the sniping. David heard the sound of a bullet sliding into the barrel of the gun. A new piece of knowledge also entered his mind. The experienced sniping Kaji could tell what kind of bullet it was just by listening to the sound of the bullet sliding into the barrel of the gun. In the T3 sniper assistance device display, A large shield Kaji was pushed back a step by the spiky Caliceri's charge. It was this step that caused a hole to appear in the originally complete defensive formation. The spiky Caliceri did not seem to want to play anymore. The moment the hole appeared in the formation, the 6 stingers on the back of the spiky Caliceri suddenly retracted and were ready to fire. It was also at this moment that the sound of the sniper rifle rang out. The level 1 material bullet rushed out of the barrel in a flash of fire. David felt the huge recoil from the gun. Fortunately, the exoskeleton armor on Kaji's body dissipated most of the recoil. The rest was suppressed by Kaji's strong body. David sensed Kaji's current state. Because the sniper rifle could not be shifted, sniping Kaji forcefully suppressed all of the recoil, causing sniping Kaji to feel a sense of suffocation for a short period of time. In this state, sniping Kaji skillfully pressed a level 1 bullet into the barrel of the gun and fired again. This was not a 1 + 1 = 2 reaction. After 2 consecutive shots, the recoil sniping Kaji's body received was not any weaker than when Kaji was directly attacked by the Zergs. In fact, in order to cause fatal damage to a level 1 Zerg like the spiky Caliceri, the instantaneous damage of the sniper rifle far exceeded the defense of the level 1 Zerg shell, and the location of the attack had to be its fatal weakness. The first level 1 bullet just happened to pass through the gap of the shield and hit the white spot below the spiky Caliceri's head. At this moment, another knowledge appeared in David's mind. The white spot below the spiky Caliceri's head was where its heart was. However, most of the time, the spiky Caliceri would use their thick head armor to block its fatal point. Only when attacking would this fatal point be exposed. The level 1 bullet flew over a distance of 500 meters and hit the white spot below the spiky Caliceri's head almost at the same time as the gunshot. The level 1 bullet hit the shell of the spiky Caliceri, causing green splashes, followed by the spiky Caliceri's mournful howl. The second level 2 bullet was less than half a second after the first one. It passed through the gap of the shield again and hit another spiky Caliceri that crashed into the shield. This time, the target was the spiky Caliceri's eyes. Black liquid accompanied the spiky Caliceri's howl. This spiky Caliceri was heavily injured. In just 1 second, the situation of the battle had changed. The terrifying power of sniping Kaji was fully displayed at this moment. Chapter 40. Although the sniper Kaji had a great result, the 5 Kaji were unable to achieve anything. On the other hand, the sniper Kaji had instantly killed 1 spike Calicerate and heavily injured another. However, only David, who sensed the state of the sniper Kaji, knew that the Kaji could not fire a 3rd shot. The reaction force of this extremely powerful sniper rifle was extremely terrifying. In the Interstellar Federation, although many designers wanted to reduce the reaction force, it was proven that every time the reaction force was reduced, more damage would be lost. The sniper soldiers would rather endure the powerful recoil than weaken the attack power of their sniper rifle by even a little bit. The sniper Kaji existed to kill in 1 shot. The second choice was to heavily injure the Zerg. The sniper Kaji would never choose to lightly injure the Zerg. David sensed the sniper's body trembling faintly. It only took 3 seconds for most of the remaining force in the sniper's body to dissipate. This was a must-learn skill for the sniper Kaji. It could speed up the body's ability to fight again. However, 3 seconds on the battlefield was enough to change a lot of things. 1 spike Calicerate released all 6 of its stingers and jumped over the shield to attack the 5 Kaji at the same time. The other spike Calicerate rammed into the shield, making it impossible for the Kaji to defend. In this situation, the 5 Kaji had to give it their all. They split into 2 groups and blocked the 2 spike Calicerates. However, at this time, the last spike Calicerate that was not injured took advantage of this opportunity to bypass the 5 Kaji and charged in the direction of the Kaji. Once the spike Calicerate started charging, its speed was not something a normal Kaji could keep up with. Not to mention, among the 5 Kaji, there was no Kaji that was known for its speed. When the sniper Kaji's body recovered, 3 seconds had passed, and the spike Calycerate was less than 300 meters away from the rock. From the T3 sniper assistance device, David could clearly see the disgusting hair on the spike Calycerate's body. The sniper Kaji did not even move. The super-long sniper rifle followed the approaching spike Calycerate. A large amount of data appeared and began another analysis. However, the analysis process this time was more complicated. The spike Calycerate constantly used the rocks and the shaking of its body to avoid the sniper Kaji's lock. The Zerg and the Interstellar Federation had had tens of thousands of years of history. Kaji, the same way the Kaji, was familiar with the Zerg. Although the spike Calycerate was not intelligent, the sniper Kiss had to be killed. The spike Calycerate, it was getting closer and closer. The spike Calycerate was only 100 meters away from the sniper Kaji. At this distance, the spike Calycerate only needed a few seconds to get close to the sniper Kaji. David was anxious, but he could feel the calm heartbeat of the sniper Kaji. It was as if this kind of danger was not enough to affect him. Just when the spike Calycerate was 50 meters away from the sniper Kaji, it began to retract its 6 stingers. At this moment, the white spot under its head was revealed. The sniper Kaji's finger moved slightly. A huge force was fed back to his exoskeleton armor and his body. At the same time, the level 1 bullet flew into the white spot. The body of the spiky Calycerate trembled, and its heart was directly blown apart by this blow. However, its strong vitality allowed it to continue moving forward. In addition to the previous inertia, the distance of 50 meters was covered in an instant. However, when it got close to the sniper Kaji, the last trace of strength in its body disappeared. The spike Calycerate's corpse slid a few meters on the ground and stopped in front of the big rock where the sniper Kaji was. The sniper Kaji did not even look at the spike Calycerate. His target had changed to the 2 spike Calycerates in the distant battlefield. David received another lesson in his mind. When there were comrades in the front, as long as they were not dead, they had to maintain the deterrence of the sniper rifle in their hands. Do not think about retreating. The super long sniper rifle was not suitable for use while moving. At the same time, the huge recoil could not be eliminated while standing. In other words, as long as the sniper Kaji stood up, he would lose the ability to fight. It would take time to crawl again and recalculate all kinds of data. The wasted time would be enough to change the situation on the battlefield. Of course, most of the time, the Kaji would try their best to protect the sniper Kaji. The value of the sniper Kaji made the Kaji hope that there would be a sniper Kaji in the team. The battle ended very quickly. 3 spike Calycerates were killed by the sniper Kaji. 1 was killed by the Warhammer Kaji after it was heavily injured, and the last spike Calycerate was killed by 5 Kaji. David's illusion did not end. The battle scenes that followed were constantly changing Kaji's team and different level 1 Zergs. There was even a battle involving 30 Kaji. Many Kaji besieged a level 2 Zerg. It was a massacre. David felt the helplessness of the sniper Kaji. In the end, several sniper Kaji used level 2 bullets at the same time. The sniper Kaji was heavily injured and killed the level 2 Zerg. In that battle, all 30 Kaji died. After that, there were no more Zergs in the illusion. The targets of the sniper Kaji changed to various spaceships. Different Kaji, but they were still the sniper Kaji's powerful long-range combat power. Although the illusion did not show the growth of the sniper Kaji other than the battle scenes, David now understood why Abbott was so abnormal. After an excellent sniper Kaji went through a cruel battle, his mentality was completely destroyed. He became a mercenary, killing people for fun. Although he was just as calm when he picked up a sniper rifle, it was only when he picked up a sniper rifle that he was sniping Kaji. David did not know how to evaluate Abbott, who caused the deaths of almost 100 people. After he walked out of the illusion, he could not help but open the information about Abbott again. Perhaps Abbott's previous name was not this. The information did not mention Abbott's previous experience. Perhaps Abbott did not want to recall that experience. Even his previous name was the same. Closing the information in his hand, David's body trembled slightly. This was the defensive technique of sniping Kaji. Unexpectedly, David completed it very easily. After mastering the proficient-level body arts and proficient-level Warhammer, he found that it was very easy for him to master the basics of combat abilities of the same level. At this time, he was very interested in Myron's invitation to the shooting range. He wanted to remind Myron when he had the time. Just as he was thinking, the identity bracelet on his wrist suddenly issued a notification. He opened it. It was a message from the program he had implanted in the Hester Hotel's security photon computer. He had set up some important reminders in the photon computer, such as Mr. Hester's schedule every day, such as events related to Jeremy, and so on. This time, it was a message sent by Jeremy to Mr. Hester. It seemed like he wanted to keep it a secret, so he sent it to the Hester Hotel's security photon computer through Skynet. In fact, this was the safest way. The identity bracelet had an identity tracking function. If the identity was locked by the relevant departments, then all the information from the identity bracelet would be intercepted. In order to ensure 100% safety, Trainer Jeremy used this method. However, he did not expect that the Hester Hotel security photon computer had already been hacked by David. Using this method to send a message was equivalent to telling David the news. The message was very simple. There was only one line of words. All actions against the target have been suspended. They will not be activated in a short period of time. This was a brainless message. Even if other people knew about it, they would be confused. However, after David saw it, he understood the meaning behind it. It seemed that because of Garen's appearance and Garen's interference in the investigation of Leeson Security Company, the mastermind became vigilant. They were afraid that Garen would find out more. So they decided to stop their actions against David. When David saw this message, he couldn't help but feel relieved. He needed time to grow. The mastermind had always been targeting him, especially with Mr. Hester's existence. It made him suspect his stepmother Bertha, making him almost untrustworthy. Garen's timely appearance, as well as his powerful status and strength, made the mastermind afraid. Under Galen's tutelage, David grew even faster. Chapter 41. Just as David let out a long sigh of relief, the security photon computer sent another message. Let's meet and talk. This message was sent by Mr. Stett's account, and the target was Jeremy. Jeremy had his own account in the security photon computer, but for David, who had control of the photon computer, it was impossible to hide it. Soon, Jeremy replied. 3 days later at 1 o'clock sharp. In a reply, he gave an address and coordinates. David opened the address and saw that it was a small beverage store. Due to the environment of Planet Monolith, natural beverages were a high-end luxury in Parent City. But because of this, there were many beverage stores that made a living from them. For example, the vegetable and fruit cultivation base under David's house. If he wanted to earn more credits, he could definitely open a beverage store like this. However, this was not within his consideration. David did not care about those few credits anymore. He noted down the time and turned off his identity bracelet. Before going to bed at night, David practiced the 18 styles of physical arts again. Although the bedroom was a little small, he could clearly see the changes in his status panel. After practicing the 18 styles of physical arts, he found that his strength and vitality had both increased to 3.02. The skillful physical arts that should not have belonged to normal people had a strong effect after David's practice. There were no strengthening potions, only strengthened muscles. According to the 2 times he practiced the 18 styles of physical arts today, each practice could increase his strength and vitality by 0.01, which meant that he could increase his strength and vitality by 0.02 per day. He calculated in his mind. If he did not stop strengthening his muscles and practiced every day, he could reach the strength standard of a Kaji in 10 days. Of course, this was under the premise that there was no bottleneck. 1,000 kilograms was the lowest standard for a Kaji, but it was the boundary between a normal person and a Kaji. Without 1,000 kilograms of strength, it was impossible to equip the exoskeleton armor. With hope in his heart, David washed up and went to sleep. The next morning, While David was still practicing the storm hammer technique in the underground fitness room, his identity bracelet alerted him that a car was approaching. Master, Lucian from Leeson Security Company is here to visit. Then, he received a message from his AI butler, Emma. Uncle Garen, someone from Ritsuka Security is here. David said to Garen, who was teaching Myron beside him. Go and receive them yourself. There's no need to be polite to them. Garen waved his hand nonchalantly. Then he slapped Myron's body and yelled, I wasn't paying attention and made a mistake again. David didn't look at Myron's resentful eyes. Since 6 a.m, other than breakfast, they had been practicing here. Myron also wanted to go out and exercise. Opening the door, David saw a cargo hover car and a middle-aged man in business attire. The middle-aged man appeared to be extremely reserved. When he saw David, he seemed to be a little fearful. Mr. David, I'm Lucian, the manager of the Exalted Security Company in Parent City. I apologize to you on behalf of the company, and I've also brought compensation. General Manager Lucian bowed and said humbly. Such familiar words. It was very similar to what Manager Gisson said when he came last time. David wanted to be angry, but when he saw a few staff members moving items down from the cargo hover car, he, who had mastered the electronic warfare ability, immediately recognized that they were components of a medium-sized server. He wanted to ask, is it necessary for a security company in a small city to purchase a medium-sized server as the main server? In fact, the Exalted Security Company had no choice. Due to the security issues in Parent City, most residents would choose a more secure security system to protect themselves. This made the competition between security companies extremely fierce. The Exalted Security Company was able to defeat many other security companies because of the medium-sized server as the main server and become the largest security company in Parent City. If it wasn't for the survival crisis, General Manager Lucian wouldn't be willing to compensate David with a medium-sized server. He wasn't afraid of David, but Garen behind David. Mr. Lucian, welcome, David said with a polite smile. He invited General Manager Lucian into the hall and invited him to take a seat. Mr. David, I brought the main server this time. Mr. David, please specify a location for the installation. General Manager Lucian pointed at the staff members who were still unloading the goods and said to David, just by looking at the 4 to 5 staff members carefully moving the goods for such a long time, one could tell that the size of the medium-sized server was not small. A medium-sized server was not an ordinary optical computer that could be easily moved. It must be operated by professionals. General Manager Lucian invited the service team of the medium-sized server seller. In order to get the service team to work as soon as possible, he paid a considerable amount of credit points. Thank you, Mr. Lucian. Install it in that room, David said as he pointed to an empty room on the first floor. General Manager Lucian nodded and whispered something to a staff member beside him. The staff member ran out. Soon, the components of the medium-sized server were moved into the room one by one. Mr. David, don't worry. They're all professionals. We will adjust the main server and give you the final authority before we leave. General Manager Lucian explained. Emma, bring the juice. David just remembered that he hadn't received the guest yet and said to the AI butler Emma. General Manager Lucian's expression loosened. He could see that David was trying to appease them. With Leeson Security's current market share, as long as they could pass this stage, it didn't matter how much they had to pay. The reason he sent the medium-sized server was to exchange for David's forgiveness. Now that it seemed to be effective, General Manager Lucian could finally put down a huge rock in his heart. Mr. David, here's some small components. Consider it a small gift from our company. He put a box in his hand on the coffee table and pushed it towards David. David opened the box. There were indeed some components inside. However, it wasn't just the components for the medium-sized server. There were also some special electronic devices. For example, he saw a miniature scanner, a mimicry monitor, and a signal isolator. These were all small devices. These weren't ordinary electronic devices. Only a regular security company could purchase these special electronic devices through certain channels. The miniature scanner could be held in the hand and scan for life forms in the building within 50 meters in front of it. It could then be transferred to other display devices. The mimicry monitor could be placed anywhere. The built-in chip would automatically analyze the surrounding environment and change the color of the display to achieve the effect of concealment. Although this wasn't true invisibility, it could be ignored by most people. The signal isolator could completely isolate the signal within a certain range. This was similar to the one used by the Heavenly Wolf mercenary group when they first attacked David's house. However, this one was smaller. The characteristic of these few electronic devices was that they were small. They were small enough to be used for espionage activities and were contraband items on the market. David had come into contact with similar equipment when he received the fusion of electronic countermeasure knowledge. Therefore, after seeing them, he fiddled with them casually. General Manager Lucian's mouth showed a hint of pride. He could see that David liked these electronic devices very much. Ever since he knew that Garen wanted the Lee Xion security company to compensate David for the main server, he judged that David must have an extraordinary love for electronic devices. Otherwise, no matter how expensive the medium-sized server was, it was just a larger optical computer for laymen. Therefore, he placed 3 of his own personal collection among the components of the medium-sized server. As General Manager Lucian, who also liked electronic devices, knew that David should have the same preferences as him. It turned out that his choice was right. "Mr. Lucian, I'm very satisfied with these small gifts," David said as he reached out his right hand. "Mr. David, I hope to have a good relationship with you. If you have any needs for electronic devices, please be sure to find me." General Manager Lucian said with a smile as he reached out his right hand to hold David's hand. David didn't just like these electronic devices. He just happened to need them among the electronic devices that General Manager Lucian sent. Chapter 42. David, you have to practice hard. I'll be waiting for you in Non-City. Galen stood in front of the gate and encouraged David. "Uncle Galen, I'll work hard." After a few days of interaction, David felt like family to Galen. He nodded hard and said, "Myron, you have to work hard too." Galen said to Myron, "Uncle Galen, I'll get into non-university with David." Myron said confidently. Although it had only been a few days, he had managed to learn the 36 styles of the storm hammer technique after days and nights of hard work. With the guidance of a teacher like Galen, as long as he worked hard, it would be easy for him to improve his mastery of the hammer in the future. Galen waved at the two of them, and then a ladder descended from the sky. As the spaceship hovering in the sky was invisible, the ladder seemed to extend from the void. David knew that there was a spaceship above his house last time, but he didn't know what model it was. When Galen entered the void, the engine roared, and the spaceship moved slowly, causing the invisibility to lose its effect. David saw a completely black aircraft with a wingspan of 30 meters. The streamlined design of the aircraft made it look as elegant as a black swan. "God, it's the Black Phantom!" Myron exclaimed excitedly. David had no impression of the name Black Phantom, so he probably had never heard of it. The Black Phantom is a super-fast atmospheric aircraft with the ability to fly in space, just like Gladstone in the flying car, Myron continued to explain. As he spoke, the elegant Black Phantom suddenly accelerated, turned into a black light, and disappeared into the sky. David finally understood what Myron meant by super-fast atmospheric flight. At the same time, he also understood what Myron meant. The Black Phantom was the best aircraft of the same size. However, when he thought about how Galen's followers, Kaji, were all equipped with level 2 war hammers, it was understandable. We're free. Let's go out and relax today." Myron laughed and said to David after seeing the Black Phantom disappear, "Myron, I want to practice a little more today. Let's go to the shooting range you mentioned in a few days." David shook his head. In the past 2 days, he had fused the 2 knowledge balls of shield mastery, 50% proficiency, and heavy axe mastery, 70% proficiency. As a result, he didn't have time to practice many abilities. Now that Galen had left, his Warhammer mastery had basically reached the real Warhammer mastery, 83% proficiency. He could practice the other skills. He kept feeling like he didn't have enough time. Plus, tomorrow was Mr. Foster's meeting with trainer Jeremy. He needed time to plan his actions. David, you're almost becoming a machine. Myron looked at David and shook his head. Then he continued, forget it, I'll go home first. Mother says that she misses me several times a day. I'll come find you in 2 days. David didn't want to play, and Myron also gave up the idea of going out to play. He didn't stay any longer and drove away in his Gladstone Type 6 car. David returned to his empty home and couldn't help but heave a long sigh of relief. He walked into the room next to him. This room had been converted into a computer room with a medium-sized server. As soon as he entered the room, he felt a chill. This was a temperature that was specially set for the medium-sized server. Even the humidity was stable in a range. The medium-sized server didn't consume public energy. It had its own energy system, which was provided by 5 krypton crystals. The medium-sized server took up half the space of the wall. In an era where identity bracelets could handle most of the work, one could imagine the computing power of such a large medium-sized server. David sat down in the control chair and put on a head-mounted display system. Then he appeared in a virtual world. Virtual reality technology had been around for a long time, but because of its impact on the brain, minors were forbidden to use it. David was now in a virtual world generated by the medium-sized server. It had nothing to do with virtual reality connected to Skynet. That was why he dared to break the law. Of course, the reason why he was confident in entering a virtual world as a minor was because of his 3, 4 spirit value. With so much spirit energy integrated into his soul, he didn't believe that he couldn't adapt to virtual reality. He had been studying the medium-sized server during his break for the past 2 days. As the main server of Leeson Security Company, Leeson Security Company built a closed virtual world in it. The original purpose of this virtual world was to test the operation of the security system. It could simulate the real environment of a neighborhood, a street, or even a city. The security system installed applications in these virtual environments, and then the medium-sized server simulated the attacks of various commonly used electronic warfare software on the market, as well as various kinds of theft. At the same time, it could also install the security system of a hostile company, find the loopholes in the system, and directly destroy the hostile company. If this kind of test was in the real world, it would be impossible to carry out. However, the results obtained here were almost the same as in the real world. Of course, David didn't need this kind of environment. However, he had obtained the ultimate authority of the medium-sized server. His virtual character could freely manipulate the virtual world in the virtual world. Ever since he had obtained 20% proficiency in sniping, he had been thinking about how to improve his sniping ability. He was not a Kaji sniper, and he didn't have a special sniper rifle. It was even more impossible for him to risk his life fighting the Zergs for nothing. Other combat abilities could be mastered through corresponding practice. Even if he didn't have advanced techniques like the Storm Warhammer technique, he could still improve his mastery of basic techniques through practice. Now that he had 20% proficiency in sniping, if he didn't improve it, he would soon be overtaken by others even though he was 1 step ahead. Therefore, he thought of the virtual world in the medium-sized server. He was different from other Kaji snipers. At the same time, he was also a highly skilled electronic warfare engineer. He could completely tailor a training environment for himself. David didn't know how other Kaji snipers trained, but he guessed that no one would have a lot of knowledge and experience about sniping Kaji snipers without even touching a normal sniper rifle. What he needed was to constantly train his analytical skills to shoot faster. This required a lot of real environments. This was exactly what David lacked, and the virtual world could provide it for him. David's hand constantly pulled lines of data in the air and then modified them. In the virtual world, buildings disappeared one after another, and the ground was replaced by stones and mud. The original urban environment became a wilderness environment in his hands. These were all restored wilderness environments based on the knowledge he had obtained. He didn't know whether this was the monolith or the Warstar environment. Then, a spiky chelicerate appeared. David found a virtual image of the spiky chelicerate on Skynet and spent some credits to buy and download it. The virtual image included the spiky chelicerate's combat habits. After activation, there wasn't much difference between the actions of a real spiky chelicerate. Many people in the virtual world always had a lot of special hobbies, so as long as one had enough credits, almost everything could be downloaded from Skynet. However, David soon ran into trouble. The spiky chelicerate could be downloaded, but everything related to Kaji couldn't be found on Skynet. The exoskeleton armor used to snipe Kaji, the special sniper rifle, these equipment couldn't even be found on Skynet. David didn't know if this was only the case on the Monolith planet or the whole Interstellar Federation, but with the limited network environment in Parent City, he could only search on the Monolith planet Skynet. In the end, David had no choice but to make his own. He didn't have the parameters of the exoskeleton armor used to snipe Kaji, nor did he have the parameters of the special sniper rifle. However, he had the real thing, the T3 sniper assistance device. He used a miniature scanner to scan the appearance and structure of the T3 sniper assistance device into the virtual world of the medium-sized server, and then imported its control program. Although he couldn't recreate the T3 sniper assistance device in the real world, he could create the same virtual item in the virtual world. David activated the spiky chelicerate. The two sides were 500 meters apart, and the spiky chelicerate rushed towards him. He began to calculate and analyze the random wind direction, temperature, and humidity in the virtual environment. They were all quickly detected by him through the T3 sniper assistance device. At the moment he simulated firing, the spiky chelicerate stopped in place. Because he didn't have the data of a real sniper rifle, the gun track he analyzed turned into a green line, while the medium-sized server analyzed the most accurate gun track and turned it into a red line. David only needed to judge the difference between the green line and the red line to know whether he had made the correct judgment. Chapter 43. It was the first time David had used the T3 sniper assistance device to practice. Since calculating and analyzing the trajectory of a bullet was more like common knowledge, the result that took him 5 seconds to calculate was almost identical to the correct result of the medium-sized server. The green line shot from the T3 sniper assistance device crossed a distance of nearly 300 meters and hit the white spot below the head of the stationary spiky chelicerate. The difficulty was how to grasp the opportunity to calculate the trajectory of the bullet so that it would be exactly the same as when the spiky chelicerate revealed its fatal weakness. 5 seconds was a little too long. Although he had accurately calculated the trajectory of the bullet that killed the spiky chelicerate, the time it took was enough for the real sniper Kaji to fire 2 or 3 shots. However, David was not in a hurry. Instead, he smiled happily. He realized that using the virtual world could really train his calculation and analysis skills. He believed that as long as he practiced more here, he could definitely reach the level of Sniper Kaji with 20% proficiency in calculation and analysis. Of course, this was only training his calculation and analysis skills. There was still a big difference between it and real sniping. It did not take into account the impact of a real sniper rifle used by Kaji and the huge reaction force after the shot. At that moment, the identity bracelet on David's wrist made a notification sound. In this virtual world, his identity wristband was synchronized with his real-life identity wristband. He glanced at it and found that it was already nighttime to practice the 18 styles of physical arts. He had spent most of the day in the virtual world. No wonder they don't allow minors to enter the virtual world. They probably don't want minors to be addicted to it. David muttered to himself as he took off his virtual reality helmet. Although he was not playing, he was really addicted to it. Otherwise, he would not have forgotten to eat. He reset his daily schedule on his identity bracelet and controlled the time he spent in the virtual world to set aside time to practice other subjects. At noon on January 5th, David finished his practice early. He found a large hooded garment in the cloakroom. This garment could cover his body and his face. Before he was ready to leave, Although he knew that the people who wanted to harm him had decided to stop their activities, he still let the shadow attendant fly out to check. After confirming that there were no abnormalities, he opened the door and walked out. This time, he did not take a flying car. Instead, he hailed a public hover car and headed to the beverage store. When he was one street away from the beverage store, he got off the hover car and walked. Next to the beverage store was a barbecue shop. After David entered, he found a seat that was only one wall away from the beverage store and sat down. He glanced at the display in front of him. The price of the barbecue shop was obviously very low. Obviously, the meat sold here was synthetic meat. Although synthetic meat was called meat, it was made of meat. In fact, it was made from various edible ingredients and the essence of the meat. However, this kind of synthetic meat was almost indistinguishable from real meat after being barbecued. The price was many times higher, so it was the first choice of ordinary people. With David's wealth in his previous life, it was impossible for him to come to a place like this. However, the current David did not have that kind of sense of superiority. After eating so much gutter oil in his previous life, he was able to stuff mutton skewers into his mouth. Eating synthetic meat was not a problem for him. He chose 2 synthetic steaks on the display. They only cost him 20 credits. After waiting for about 5 minutes, the 2 golden brown synthetic steaks were served by the staff. They also came with a drink that was also synthetic. David looked at the time. It was still a few minutes to 1. He picked up a synthetic steak that was labeled on a metal bar and lowered his head to eat slowly. The hood and the synthetic steak completely covered his face. In this barbecue shop, he did not stand out because there were customers in the same attire. Many customers who came to eat did not want others to pay attention to them, especially those who wanted to eat but did not want to affect their image. The synthetic steak tasted good. Although David knew it was synthetic meat, he ate it with relish. After eating homegrown food for a long time, all the meat he ate was strengthened meat. Although the price was 10 times higher than synthetic meat, the taste was the same. No matter how delicious something was, there would be a day when it was enough. However, he did not forget the purpose of his visit today. The shadow attendant passed through the glass wall above his head and came to the street. Then, the shadow attendant picked up the camouflage monitor that David had left on the windowsill. The monitor, which was as small as a button, automatically merged with the windowsill. The camouflage monitor only weighed about 40 grams. The shadow attendant, who could pick up 100 grams, did not use much effort to pick it up. The shadow attendant's hand wrapped around the camouflage monitor, and the camouflage monitor completely disappeared into thin air. No one around noticed this scene. No one would pay attention to the tiny object that suddenly appeared and disappeared on the windowsill. The shadow attendant took the camouflage monitor and entered the beverage shop next to it from the main entrance. The decoration of this beverage shop was obviously a grade higher than the barbecue shop. There were separate compartments, and many green plants embellished the environment with a touch of vitality and peace. The shadow attendant floated on top of the beverage shop, slowly waiting for the target to appear. David, who was separated by a wall, put most of his attention on the shadow attendant. He ate the synthetic steak in his hand mechanically. Not long after, when it was 1 minute to 1, David saw Trainer Jeremy through the shadow attendant's perspective. Trainer Jeremy was tall and extremely strong. Even if he was wearing loose clothes, it could not hide his valiant aura. He should be a regular customer here. As soon as he entered the beverage shop, a clerk led him to a relatively quiet seat. This seat was surrounded by 2 partitions and walls, and the other side was mostly blocked by green plants. It was very quiet. The shadow attendant saw that Trainer Jeremy had chosen a seat, so it flew to the top of the seat and gently placed the camouflage monitor directly above the seat. It was just enough to monitor the seat below. David, on the other side, retracted most of his attention. He continued to eat the synthetic steak while freeing one of his hands to operate the camouflage monitor on his bracelet. He adjusted the camouflage monitor's angle and range to only receive the sound from the seat below. The rest of the beverage shop's music and noise would be filtered out. With the camouflage monitor's help, he did not need to control the shadow attendant all the time. He could watch the conversation next door through the camouflage monitor. He just finished operating the camouflage monitor. It was exactly 1 o'clock. An inconspicuous hover car stopped in front of the beverage shop. 2 bodyguards with serious faces came down from the hover car first. After scanning the surroundings, they lowered their heads and said something to the people inside the car. Mr. Stett, who looked like a middle-aged man, came down from the hover car. He was very low-key today, and he was wearing a set of standard travel clothes. Although he tried his best to hide his aura, he still did not fit in with the environment on this street. "You guys stay outside," he ordered in a deep voice and then walked into the beverage shop. David looked at the 2 bodyguards. From the way they walked, their bodies contained a lot of power. They were probably 2 Kaji. David looked away. He knew that the powerful Kaji might be able to sense other people's gazes. These 2 Kaji were not important. He transmitted the image from the camouflage monitor to the contact lens receiver on his eyes. The sound was transmitted through bone sensing technology. This was the way many people chose to watch videos and listen to music. It would not disturb others, and at the same time, he could enjoy the best video and sound to the greatest extent. "Have a seat. I ordered your favorite Amore fruit juice." Trainer Jeremy did not get up from his seat. He just pointed at the empty seat opposite him and said with a smile. David's eyes moved. Trainer Jeremy's status was obviously not ordinary. No matter what, Mr. Stett was a person of high status in Parent City. However, a trainer from a gym talked to him in a completely equal tone. The relationship between the 2 of them was so close that they understood each other's tastes. Chapter 44. Jeremy, why did you stop the operation? Mr. Stett had obviously come with a lot of emotions. After he sat down, he did not drink the amio fruit juice in front of him. Instead, he asked directly, "Stett, the organization does not only serve you. We have more problems to consider. Now that David has attracted a lot of attention, and with Han's influence, any action against David in a short period of time might cause an accident. This is not something the organization wants to see." Trainer Jeremy's smile disappeared as he said, in a deep voice. David, who was next door, heard his name and knew that there was a secret organization. He knew that his previous guess was correct. "Jeremy, I've been feeling a little tired lately, and the wrinkles on my face are increasing. Can the organization give me a bottle of holy water of youth?" Mr. Stett asked in a negotiating tone as he touched his face. "Stett, you know how precious holy water of youth is. You're just a peripheral member of the organization. Without the corresponding contribution, we cannot provide you with holy water of youth." Trainer Jeremy shook his head and refused. "You can't blame me for what happened to David. The organization promised to eliminate him, but they have not succeeded." Mr. Stett's voice was a little louder as he protested. "Are you blaming the organization?" Trainer Jeremy's eyes flashed fiercely, but it quickly disappeared. He explained in a deep voice, "I personally set up the trap and used a method of mind interference. It should have been foolproof." Mr. Stett did not say anything. He also wanted to know how David could still be alive under the organization's trap. It should be the serious mercenary group's unintentional interference that weakened my influence on David's mind, allowing David to survive. In fact, Trainer Jeremy also had a lot of doubts about David's survival. He was just trying to force an explanation to Mr. Stett. Trainer Jeremy could not understand how an ordinary high school student could break free from his mind interference. It was originally a perfect plan. The high school student's curiosity for new things, worship for unknown civilizations, and desire for power became the motivation to try the sacrifice. This made the death of a child with the title of Nation Knight an accident, and it was the kind of accident that could not be announced to the public. The government would only weaken this matter. But in the end, David was still alive. After several Kaji died outside David's house, David, who was originally unremarkable, received a lot of attention. It had even drawn out a big shot like Garen, which was beyond Trainer Jeremy's control, so he urgently stopped all operations against David. "Jeremy, can't the organization give me a bottle of ageless holy water in advance?" Mr. Stett begged again. At this point, he no longer had his lofty aura. He continued, "Don't worry. Once the news blows over, I'll arrange for someone to kill David. By then, with Hans's condition, he'll definitely collapse. The title of Nation Knight will then be passed down to my grandson, Eddie. Eddie is still young, and Bertha is a woman who doesn't care about anything. The title of Nation Knight will eventually fall into my hands. Stet, don't you understand? If you can directly kill a family member with the title of Nation Knight, the police system and the military will investigate you. Even the organization may be exposed." Trainer Jeremy shouted in a deep voice. "But David will only stay in Parent City for half a year. With Garen's ability, David will definitely enter non-university. By then, it will be impossible to deal with David," Mr. Stet said anxiously. "Hans's title of Nation Knight is a rare title that can be passed down thrice. Hans himself did not use the option of Nation Knight. His title is something that the organization must obtain. This is beyond doubt. When the news of dealing with David dies down, the organization will arrange another accident for him. You don't have to interfere in this matter anymore," Trainer Jeremy said in a heavy voice. When David heard this, he finally understood what these people wanted. The title of Nation Knight was the highest title that a first-tier Kaji could obtain. Its status and authority were extremely high. After the title of Nation Knight returned, he would also have the option to choose one of the most important positions in many key departments. Hans did not use this option because of his body. Instead, he entered the legal department of Parent City as if he was an ordinary retiree. This was also the first time that David knew that Hans's Nation Knight title could be passed down thrice. The information about the inheritance was more or less related to the contributions made. The normal Nation Knight title was already very rare. A title that could be passed down thrice was extremely rare even in the Interstellar Federation. This secret organization had their eyes on the third inheritance of the title of National Knight. If they could obtain the inheritance of the title of National Knight from Hans's, it would mean that they would be able to plant their own people in the important departments of the Galactic Federation at least once. And this opportunity was given to David by Hans, so David had to die. The fog in David's heart had mostly dissipated, but he still did not know what this organization was. Even when Mr. Stet and Jeremy met in secret and discussed how to deal with the family of the Nation Knight title holder, they did not mention the organization's name. From their point of view, the name of the organization was more important than anything else. "Jeremy, what about the holy water of eternal youth?" Mr. Stet did not care about his face anymore for the sake of the holy water of eternal youth. When Hans and Bertha got married, Mr. Stet still gave them his blessings. However, Jeremy appeared and made a deal with Mr. Stet. Mr. Stet's old and weak body regained its youth after using the holy water of eternal youth. Although the Interstellar Federation had many ways to maintain one's youth, those methods were not targeted at normal people. Instead, they were targeted at Kaji, whose body was far superior to normal people. Of course, there were some extremely precious medicines that normal people could use, but it was not for Mr. Stet, who came from a small city on a fringe planet. However, the holy water of eternal youth was not something that could be used only once. One bottle had to be taken every year, or else one would start to age quickly. After that, he began to serve the organization in order to obtain the holy water of eternal youth. In order to achieve this goal, he used all kinds of methods to hand over a large amount of information to the organization. He did not even hesitate to betray his daughter's happiness. He wanted to kill David and Hans to obtain the Nation Knight title in the end. Jeremy knew how to control Mr. Stet, so he thought for a while and said, "This time, David's mishandling of the matter is also related to me. How about this? I will apply for a bottle of holy water of eternal youth for you. I will contact you in about 10 days. Thank you so much." Mr. Stet waved his arms excitedly. If it was not for the fact that he was not allowed to do so, he would have shouted. He was addicted to his youthful body. As long as he experienced the feeling of aging once, he did not want to experience it again. In order to achieve this goal, he would even sacrifice his soul to the devil. Jeremy knocked on the table and reminded, Stet, you need to expand the scale of Stet Hotel as soon as possible. The organization has invested so much money, but your results are not ideal. Mr. Stet took a sip of Almo fruit juice and said proudly, Jeremy, I may not be as good as you in other things, but when it comes to business, please do not worry about my ability. Oh, what did you do? Trainer Jeremy was interested and asked with a smile. Mr. Stet said softly, I started a company under an anonymous identity. Then, I used the company's name to start planning for half a year ago. I bought the shares of Central Hotel and West Hotel bit by bit. Now, more than 40% of the shares of these two hotels are in my hands. After a while, I will increase my investment and completely control these two hotels. Although his voice was very soft, David heard it all. Central Hotel and West Hotel were both large hotels that were not smaller than Stet Hotel. They were very influential. Even when the government had big operations, Kaji would often be recruited. If Mr. Stet really controlled these two hotels, then he would become the largest hotel group in Parent City. His influence would be enough to influence a lot. Chapter 45. When David returned home, it was already 4 in the afternoon. He played with the small mimicry monitor in his hand, thinking about how to deal with the situation. In fact, he only needed to give the video to the police or send it to Galen, and Mr. Foster and Jeremy would be done for. However, what David needed now was a period of dormancy. His strength was increasing rapidly. With enough time, with the help of the shadow attendant, as well as a large amount of credits and resources, he believed that he could become a Kaji in the shortest time possible. When he became a Kaji, he would have the ability to protect himself. Of course, he also had another option, which was to kill Mr. Foster himself. When he thought of this plan, David's eyes were filled with killing intent. The David of today was no longer the same as when he first came to this world, nor was he the predecessor who could be easily deceived. After fusing with many battle knowledge balls, his soul had experienced thousands of dangerous battles. In the illusions, he had been injured nearly 100 times and had been on the brink of death more than a dozen times. The number of Zergs and Kaji he had killed was uncountable. Although they were illusions, those were real experiences in his soul. Apart from the mastery of battle knowledge, there were also side effects for David. At least now, when he thought of killing someone, he did not feel the same fear as before. Instead, he felt the urge to do it immediately. Of course, this change also allowed him to adapt to living in this world. For father, for little Edie, and for stepmother Bertha, Foster must not live. David was determined. After coming up with this plan, he decided. Mr. Foster wanted to kill him, kill Hans, control little Edie, and make Bertha lose her husband and little Edie lose his father. No matter who Mr. Foster was, David would not allow Mr. Foster to destroy his life and hurt his family. It would not be easy to kill Mr. Foster, who had 2 bodyguards by his side at all times. However, David had an advantage that no one else had, and that was that he knew Mr. Foster's daily travel schedule. As long as he seized the opportunity, David could make Mr. Foster regret it for the rest of his life. David once again pulled up Mr. Steffen's recent travel plans to see if there was such an opportunity. Unfortunately, it seemed that Mr. Stet had recently discovered that he was starting to age and wrinkle his face, so he had reduced his travel plans. Basically, other than working in the Stet Hotel, he had almost no plans to go out. As for entering the Chester Hotel, David gave up without even thinking about it. He summoned the shadow attendant and placed his hand on the shadow attendant, asking the shadow attendant to open his status panel. Name, David Kerstrength, 3-0-7-1 Dexterity, 1-9-1 Physique, 3-0-7-1 Spirit, 3-4-1 Literature, 3% Proficient, Mathematics, 5% Proficient, General, 51% Proficient, Physical Skills, 1% Proficient, Longsword Mastery, 5% Proficient, Electronic Countermeasures, 98% Proficient, Warhammer Mastery, 83% Proficient, Sniper, 20% proficient, shield mastery. 50% proficient, heavy axe mastery. 70% proficient. If others were to see this long list of abilities, it would be enough to blind them. In particular, each of these combat abilities required an ordinary person to go through years of training and constantly grow through life and death situations. Needless to say, the only ability that could threaten Mr. Stet was Sniper. Although Sniper was only 20% proficient in the illusion, he understood why Sniper Kaji was called a special existence among Kaji. Its attack power was the most terrifying. As long as he could distance himself from Sniper Kaji, it would be a nightmare for the enemy. Of course, once Sniper Kaji was closed in, it would also be a nightmare for Sniper Kaji. Although he was not a Sniper Kaji and did not have a special sniper rifle, he knew of a place that had a sniper rifle that was as powerful as Sniper Kaji's, or even more powerful. That was the city defense weapons on the walls of Perlon City. As the city wall that protected the safety of Perlon City, the officials installed many powerful city defense weapons on it. Heavy laser cannons, rapid-fire anti-air cannons, Gaussian cannons, and energy shields. Of course, there was also a more conventional long-range sniper rifle. The long-range sniper rifle had a range of 5,000 meters. It used the same level 1 ammo as Sniper Kaji, but this level 1 ammo was a lot bigger. This weapon was used to target a single Zerg that approached the city defense. It was operated by a photon computer and a professional sniper. Unlike Sniper Kaji that fought in the wild, the long-range sniper rifle had a fixed position. The city wall would bear all the reaction force. The attack only required the operator to control it from a safe position slightly further away through a photon computer. Those who were talented in sniping but could not become Kaji would mostly choose to be the operator of the long-range sniper rifle. The other weapons used to attack level 1 Zergs were almost always unable to leave their corpses intact, so the benefits were reduced. However, long-range sniper rifles were different. They used penetration to attack, so the damage was more concentrated and would not cause too much damage to the Zerg's corpses. Every time the long-range sniper rifle attacked a single Zerg, it would bring benefits to the city. In addition, the level 1 ammo that was fired would be retrieved by specialized scanners. This made the long-range sniper rifle the most commonly used weapon in city defense. If there were no sound isolation devices at the edge of the city, the long-range sniper rifle's firing sound could be heard by more than half of the city's population. The first thing David thought of was the long-range sniper rifle. Of course, he would definitely not use electronic countermeasures to attack the city defense system, not to mention that if he was discovered, he would almost certainly be sentenced to death. Even if there was a problem with the city defense system, the city defense system's weapons would not be able to be used for a short period of time. The consequences could be disastrous. Moreover, even if his electronic countermeasures were as high as 98% proficient, he was still helpless against this kind of mature military defense system. This was not a confrontation at all. The military used the most advanced equipment. Most of the equipment was incomparable to civilian equipment. Many of them were unique to the military. David wanted to rely on a medium-sized server to challenge the military's defense system. That was an act of overestimating his own capabilities. Once the military's professional electronic countermeasures engineers were mobilized, he would have nowhere to hide. David wanted to directly control the long-range sniper rifle from a physical level. In this regard, as long as he could climb up the city wall, or even if he did not climb up the wall, he could let the shadow attend and control the long-range sniper rifle within 10 meters of the optical computer. A bold plan arose in his mind. He began to search for relevant information from everywhere. After practicing the 18 styles of physical arts at night, he did not go to sleep immediately. Instead, he went to the computer room. Putting on a virtual helmet, he entered the virtual world and manipulated the data again. He filled the virtual world with the information he found one by one. Soon, a section of the city wall appeared in the virtual world. The wall was 20 meters tall. For 6 kilometers away from the city wall, a huge building appeared. If anyone saw this building, they would recognize it as the West Hotel. David copied the design of the West Hotel directly from the security server of the West Hotel and rebuilt the hotel in the virtual world. At the highest point of the West Hotel was Mr. West's huge, luxurious office. This was just enough for there to be no buildings between the city wall and Mr. West's office. In Parent City, there were very few high-rise buildings. The West Hotel was one of the tallest buildings. The next step was to retrieve the weather information. With a distance of 6 kilometers, he needed good weather to be accurate. David entered the weather forecast for the next few days into the medium-sized server and brought along the official satellite cloud image. In the virtual world, he calculated the weather for the next 3 days, including temperature, humidity, wind, and other aspects. David also used this scene to perform the calculation and analysis ballistic training that he had been practicing before. Although the distance was further, the calculation method was the same. He only came out of the virtual world when his bracelet reminded him again. This time, the bracelet reminded him that it was time for him to integrate the knowledge light ball again. It had been 24 hours since the last time he integrated the knowledge light ball. Although there were only 2 unintegrated knowledge light balls left, David did not want to waste any time. The remaining 2 knowledge light balls in the shadow attendant's body were Longsword Mastery, 80% Mastery, and Spear Mastery, 99% Mastery. Chapter 46. This time, David chose the Longsword Mastery, 80% Mastery, Knowledge Ball. The yellow knowledge ball moved from the shadow attendant's body to David's body and was absorbed by his soul almost instantly. An illusion appeared in front of David's eyes. It was a person practicing swordsmanship. Similarly, he could not control the person's body and could only feel what the person was feeling. The person was holding a long sword in his hand and practicing a set of basic longsword techniques. David had also practiced this set of basic longsword techniques before. However, compared to this person, David's mastery of the basic longsword techniques was like the difference between a child and an adult. It was precisely because he had learned the basic longsword techniques that David found it easier to accept, even though he only had a 5% mastery of the basic longsword techniques. This was different from the other combat skills he had learned before. The combat skills he had learned before had 0 foundation. David immersed himself in the person's practice of the basic longsword techniques. His mastery of the longsword rapidly increased from 5% mastery of the basic longsword techniques. After he finished practicing the basic longsword techniques, the person's enemy became the Zerg. His sword became sharper, and each of his attacks carried a great deal of lethality. David had fused the 4 knowledge balls of Warhammer, Heavy Axe, Shield, and Snipe. Other than Snipe Kaji, he had never met a Kaji who could kill a level 1 Zerg single-handedly. However, this time, Sword Kaji continued to use fast and light swordsmanship in the battle, increasing the number of wounds on the Hunter Mantis in front of him. Although the Hunter Mantis was relatively weak among the level 1 Zergs, it was still a level 1 Zerg. Generally, it would require the cooperation of multiple Kaji to deal with a level 1 Zerg. As the number of wounds on the Hunter Mantis increased, its speed became slower and slower. Sword Kaji was not in a hurry. He continued to use his techniques to slowly grind down the Hunter Mantis. Sword Kaji was like an experienced hunter. He was neither anxious nor flustered. The sword in his hand was like a gust of wind. Every time it swept past the Hunter Mantis, it would bring out green blood. David had obtained relevant knowledge from Sword Kaji. When facing the insectoids, the long sword could only wander around. The long sword was not a heavy weapon, so it could not inflict heavy damage while also repelling the insectoids. In other words, when a long sword hit the Hunter Mantis, one had to consider the Hunter Mantis counterattack. However, the Warhammer was different. As long as it hit the Hunter Mantis, it would have a unique repelling effect of heavy weapons, so the Zerg would not be able to counterattack immediately. This was also the reason why Sword Kaji only continued to injure the Hunter Mantis and did not inflict heavy damage to its weak points. Before he was sure that he could kill the hunter mantis, and without the cooperation of his companions, he would be putting himself in danger if he attacked in a hurry. In the end, the long sword still pierced through the heart of the hunter mantis. At this time, the green blood of the hunter mantis was almost depleted, and its insect shell was damaged all over. David also understood the tenacity of the insectoids through this experience, and this was only a hunter mantis. Next, Sword Kaji's enemies became other level 1 insectoids. However, Sword Kaji still managed to kill the level 1 insectoids over a long period of time. During this process, David could clearly feel Sword Kaji's growth. Sword Kaji was always alone and had never worked together with others. This continued until David could no longer feel Sword Kaji's growth in swordsmanship. Sword Kaji's opponents also became Sword Kaji. Compared to fighting the insectoids, Sword Kaji's battles with other Kaji were more like massacres. During this time, Sword Kaji had an additional long sword in his hands, becoming a dual Sword Kaji. David opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, his gaze was extremely sharp, just like the dual Sword Kaji in the illusion. Fortunately, David's spirit was as high as 3, so he was able to suppress the killing intent. He went to the bedroom and picked up the scabbard. When he held the scabbard in his hand, he felt a connection with his heart. Suppressing the urge to practice the basic longsword technique, he held the scabbard in his hand and went to the underground fitness room. Standing in the middle of the fitness room, his hand gently stroked the sword hilt. The 2 swords in the scabbard seemed to come alive and jumped out of the scabbard. He casually threw the scabbard away and caught the flying swords with both hands. He felt that he was not practicing his swordsmanship, but the 2 swords were dancing with him. It was as if he was born with the 2 swords. The level 2 long swords in his hands were sometimes light and sometimes fast. In his hands, a set of basic longsword technique was no less impressive than the Storm Warhammer technique. Maybe Uncle Galen was wrong. I was born to use a longsword. David looked at the 2 swords in his hands and could not help but mumble to himself. Maybe it was imprinted in his soul. In his previous life, he had heard many stories about swordsmen and swordmasters. The long sword in his previous life was a symbol of culture. David believed that this talent came from his soul and was not the talent of his predecessor. At least in his memory, when his predecessor practiced the long sword, he did not have any outstanding talent. Otherwise, he would not have only mastered 5% of the beginner longsword. Putting the longsword back into the scabbard, he had a feeling that although he had only practiced once, he could use the longsword to fight with enemies. However, he would not change his plan. Using the longsword to fight the real Kaji was the worst choice. With his strength of a little over 800 kilograms, he would be completely suppressed by Kaji who was over 1,000 kilograms. Not to mention, Kaji had the advantage of speed. David looked at the star Kia in the sky and was in a good mood. The mastermind would not be targeting him for a while, so he could walk out of the house without worry. He fell asleep very late last night, but woke up at 6 o'clock sharp. After practicing a set of 18 styles of physical arts, he stood outside the door early to wait for Myron. "David, you finally want to go out and have some fun?" Myron poked his head out of his Gladstone Type 6 and smiled as he opened the side door. "Myron, I've troubled you today," David said as he entered the car and sat in the front passenger seat. "David, don't mention it. It's just a small matter. Speaking of which, why are you interested in the city wall? But there's no good place to go in the morning. The nightclubs are not open." Myron waved his hand and said indifferently, "No way, you went to the nightclubs?" David looked at Myron and asked in surprise. The Boulder Star was located in the dangerous Star War zone. Although it was not affected much, danger still existed everywhere. In such an environment, some places for people to vent their emotions were very prosperous. Alcohol and sex were important ways to vent. However, minors are not allowed and was not a slogan, but a law. Once found out, the guardian would be jailed. That was why David was so shocked when he heard Myron's words. "No, I'm just saying." Myron heard David's question and felt embarrassed, as if his lie had been exposed. It made sense. He had to do a lot of training every day. Plus, he had to consider the influence of his father, Mayor Bernard, even if he did not consider himself. He could not hurt his father. The Gladstone Type 6 drove all the way to the edge of the city. The closer it got to the edge of the city, the more dilapidated the buildings became. It was different from Lancaster Street, where David was. Lancaster Street was in the middle of the city and was the safest area. Here, on the other hand, was close to the city wall. Although the insectoids could not attack here, psychologically speaking, it was much less safe. It was for this reason that the rich would not choose to live here. Only the poor would live here. David could not help but shake his head. Even in the interstellar era, there was still a serious difference in class. Not to mention, although it was the interstellar era, there were not many people who could really leave the city and go to other cities. Not only did this require a large amount of credits, but it also required the corresponding authority. It could be said that without the corresponding authority, ordinary people could only live in a city until they died of old age. For example, those high school students who could not get into university ended up like this. Without the authority, they became workers in a certain position and found a partner who also did not have the authority to have children. David, there are trillions of people in the Federation. Poverty is inevitable. Father has tried his best to change it, but most of these people have lost their life goals and are content with the status quo. It is difficult to change them. Myron sighed with emotion. David smiled helplessly. He was just an ordinary person and could not help others. Chapter 47. The Gladstone Type 6 stopped 20 meters below the western wall, and further ahead was the restricted military zone. David, this part of the city wall isn't even as high as the southern wall. If you're interested in the city wall, you should go to the southern wall. Myron said to David as he jumped out of the car. I just want to enjoy the scenery outside the city and see the city wall that protects us. David replied with a smile. He obviously wouldn't tell the truth. Up to you, but I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. The scenery outside the city isn't that great. Wait until we reach non-city. The scenery outside the city is heaven, Myron said with some yearning. David smiled. He sent a message to Myron yesterday, saying that he wanted to visit this part of the city wall. He thought it would take a few days, but Myron sent a message in the morning saying that he had already contacted his connections and could climb the city wall now. Although David's father, Hans, was the deputy director of the legal department in name, it was an empty position. If David used his connections with Hans, it might cause trouble for Hans. Myron was different. His father, Bernard, was the chief executive of Parent City. He could handle any little trouble. Most importantly, David could guarantee that even if someone suspected him, they wouldn't have any evidence to prove anything. Please show your identity. A young sergeant standing at the entrance of the restricted zone saluted the two and said, David, open your identity bracelet. The inspection here is very strict. Myron said to David as he operated his bracelet. An identity card with the logo of the Interstellar Federation popped out of his bracelet. David also activated his ID card. After the sergeant scanned it with the ID bracelet on his wrist, he relaxed a little. Mr. Myron, Mr. David, I'm Staff Sergeant Emery. I've received orders from First Lieutenant Eaton to follow you while you're visiting the city. Please follow the rules of the military zone. Staff Sergeant Emery tried his best to squeeze out an ugly smile. However, the stiff smile on his face made David feel extremely awkward. It could be seen that Staff Sergeant Emery had been in the Army for a long time and was used to being serious. He was not used to entertaining two people who were related to him. Thank you very much, Staff Sergeant Emery. We understand the rules. We're just here to take a look. We won't touch any of the items, let alone ask any questions. Myron replied with a smile. Please follow me. Staff Sergeant Emery led the way, and the other two followed behind him. First Lieutenant Eaton is the highest commander of Parent City's defense. He's the captain of the city defense. My father was the one who contacted him, Myron whispered to David as they walked. David couldn't help but look at the 20-meter-tall city wall that was getting closer and closer. It was a military fortress made entirely of steel. It was a huge project that encompassed the entire parent city, and the highest commander was only a first lieutenant. However, David soon changed the direction of his thoughts. This kind of military building might be an unimaginable project in his previous life, but what kind of place was this? This was the interstellar era. Such a city defense might be an insignificant military facility in this world. They had arrived at the bottom of the steel wall. Staff Sergeant Emery swiped his bracelet to open the door in front of him, revealing a huge elevator. The military elevator looked extremely crude. There were almost no decorations on it, and the original steel was exposed. However, there was no trace of rust on it. The elevator rose steadily and quickly. It probably took less than a second for it to reach the top. Staff Sergeant Emery swiped his bracelet again and turned back to the two of them. "Gentlemen, please don't walk in front of any weapons or equipment. Don't talk to the soldiers because they might be very unfriendly." After that, the elevator door opened. They walked out of the elevator and arrived at the top of the city wall. The city wall was 10 meters wide. Other than a long-range sniper cannon placed at set intervals, there were no other weapons. "Be careful not to step on the red area." Staff Sergeant Emery stopped Myron, who was about to take a step forward, and reminded him. David only then noticed that the ground of the city wall was covered in various colors. There were green lines, yellow, and red areas. Staff Sergeant Emery led David and Myron on the green line. David was very curious about what was under the red area. The shadow attendant beside him flew out and disappeared into the red steel ground. Then he saw a huge, heavy laser cannon through the shadow attendant's vision. It was different from what he saw in the pictures. Only when he saw the real thing did he realize how huge this heavy war weapon was. The shadow attendant only took a glance before flying back and returning to David's head. "Staff Sergeant Emery, did you bring a kid to play?" A mocking voice came from the side. It was from a soldier who was also wearing a staff sergeant's uniform. However, there was not only the rank of staff sergeant on his uniform, but also a small binoculars badge. "Staff Sergeant Harold, this is the mission given by the captain. The city government sent us an official tour document." Staff Sergeant Emery reminded in a deep voice. "Kid who hasn't even grown out his hair yet. Don't be scared by the sound of the cannon later." Staff Sergeant Harold mumbled to himself. He did not continue to provoke these two young men who obviously had powerful backgrounds. Myron's eyes flashed with anger. Although his father was the mayor, he had no control over the military system. He really couldn't do anything to Staff Sergeant Harold. David was a normal person in his past life, so he did not care about this kind of provocation. He was more concerned about the binoculars badge on Staff Sergeant Harold's chest. That was the badge of a sniper in the military. Staff Sergeant Harold was a sniper. Since he was here, it went without saying that he was the sniper who operated the long-range sniper cannon. Staff Sergeant Harold hummed a little tune as he walked in the direction of a toilet in the distance. It was obvious that he was going to relieve himself. David's gaze followed the path that Staff Sergeant Harold had come from. There was a passage leading downwards, and the door was not closed. These technicians are used to being undisciplined. They're a joke in front of you. Staff Sergeant Emery did not want the two to misunderstand that all soldiers were like this, so he explained. Due to the special position of the sniper Kaji and the Kaji, the profession of sniper appeared to be very high and mighty. Every sniper dreamed of becoming the sniper Kaji, but in reality, most snipers could not become the sniper Kaji. This was because sniping Kaji required not only sniping talent, but also Kaji talent. Even if you had both, you still needed to have a calm mind and a strong will. The Heavenly Wolf mercenary group's sniper Kaji Abbott was a depraved sniper Kaji. This was a result of a weak will. No matter what, snipers always had a sense of superiority in the military. In addition, they were on duty at key positions, so some snipers had the misconception that they were important. A proper soldier like Staff Sergeant Emery was not used to Staff Sergeant Harold's style, but he had no right to control him. As they talked, they came to the edge of the city wall where they could see the scenery outside the city. This was David's first time seeing the real wilderness. The illusions and videos he had seen before were not as realistic as this. Indeed, the scenery here was very bad. Or rather, most of the land surface of the monolith star did not have good scenery. As far as the eye could see, it was a desolate place. The ground was mostly covered in rocks and exposed gray soil. There was not a single plant, nor was there a water source. David, who lived in the city, finally understood the concept of the monolith star as an administrative planet with a low quality of life. The city had a uniform supply of energy and water, so he could not understand the true hardships of the monolith star. David, every time I see this scene, I want to leave. Myron whispered. Then let's work hard together and internat and university together. David nodded. He thought of the mesmerizing scenery in the videos and the green ecological environment outside, and city. There, he had the opportunity to obtain higher authority, walk out of the sealed world, and see the wider universe. Chapter 48. While David was conversing with Myron, a part of his mind was controlling the shadow attendant. At the same time, he himself seemed to be walking towards the entrance of the tunnel unconsciously. Since the shadow attendant could only be 10 meters away from him, he had to get closer to the entrance to do what he wanted. Sergeant Emery watched as David and Myron chatted. He stood to the side and didn't say anything. As long as David and Myron didn't do anything excessive, he wouldn't stop them. Although he was old-fashioned, he knew that these two weren't simple people. David stood still. In the tunnel, the shadow attendant had already entered a control room that didn't even close the door. Since Staff Sergeant Harold didn't close the door when he left, David didn't have to fumble around too much. The shadow attendant grabbed the control device with one hand and adjusted it. The target was displayed on the screen in the middle of the room. The shadow attendant quickly entered the coordinates it had prepared beforehand. Then a long-range sniper cannon on the city wall made a mechanical grinding sound and suddenly turned its huge cannon barrel towards the city. At the same time, Staff Sergeant Harold's identity bracelet sounded an alarm. The long-range sniper cannon he was in charge of was aiming at a safe area. Staff Sergeant Harold didn't even have time to wipe his butt. He pulled up his pants and rushed out of the toilet, running towards the control room. Although he wasn't Kaji, after years of training, he still had the strength of 700 kilograms. His speed was also very fast. However, even if he ran at his fastest speed, it would still take him 5 seconds to enter the control room. On the screen, the entire Soustel Hotel was displayed. Under the control of the shadow attendant's hands, the image of the Soustel Hotel was continuously enlarged and then fixed on the CEO's office at the top. However, the windows of the CEO's office were made of reflective materials, so the long-range sniper cannon couldn't accurately aim at Mr. Soustel, who was in the CEO's office. The security photon computer on the first floor of the Soustel Hotel automatically ran a program, and then the security scanner in the CEO's office was automatically activated. Normally, these security scanners would only be activated after Mr. Foster left the office. However, under the control of the security photon computer, the many security scanners in the CEO's office began to work. With the layout of the hotel, the security photon computer calculated the precise location of Mr. Stett's location in the huge CEO's office. This set of data was transmitted to David's ID bracelet. While chatting with Myron, David glanced at the ID bracelet. The shadow attendant in the control room quickly adjusted the target of the long-range sniper rifle and pressed the button to fire. At the same time, Staff Sergeant Harold rushed into the control room under Staff Sergeant Emery's furious gaze. Staff Sergeant Emery was furious because of the way Staff Sergeant Harold ran with his pants up. This was seen by the two visitors, which was equivalent to throwing the entire city defense brigade's face. As for the strange long-range sniper cannon, Staff Sergeant Emery did not pay much attention to it. These snipers often did unthinkable things, so it was normal to have one more. In the CEO's office in the Stett Hotel, Mr. Stett was looking through some documents. He picked up the glass of water beside him and was about to drink when he suddenly felt his heart palpitate. If he was a combat profession, he would have already determined that he was being watched by the Grim Reaper. However, although he had powerful business skills, he was only a normal person. Perhaps his mental state was different from normal people. Otherwise, he would not have felt his heart palpitate. He looked out the window and saw a flash of fire in the distance. On the city wall, Staff Sergeant Emery, David, and Myron were shaken by the sudden explosion. Staff Sergeant Emery instinctively pressed the two men to the ground to stabilize their bodies. David had experienced the recoil of Kaji's professional sniper rifle and the illusion, but the long-range sniper rifle used in city defense had much stronger recoil than a professional sniper rifle. He could clearly feel the shaking of the steel wall. Although he was already mentally prepared, he did not dare to show any obvious signs. On the other hand, he was truly frightened, so his reaction was similar to Myron's. Is Staff Sergeant Harold crazy? Staff Sergeant Emery let out a roar. His hand pressed a few times on his identity bracelet, and then the alarm rang. Just as David and Myron got up from the ground, two Kaji in white military exoskeleton armor appeared on the city wall. Then, one of them entered the control room and brought Staff Sergeant Harold out. David looked at Staff Sergeant Harold with guilt in his heart. It seemed that Staff Sergeant Harold was the scapegoat for this incident. He had inquired about the military and knew that the soldiers in white uniforms were all military police. They were usually responsible for maintaining internal order in the military and supervising illegal activities. They also had the right to detain illegal personnel and carry out searches and seizures. During wartime, they were responsible for maintaining discipline and order on the battlefield. The state of the monolith planet was always wartime. These two military police Kaji had the right to arrest any soldier. Of course, when arresting an officer, there had to be corresponding evidence. Staff Sergeant Harold was also dumbfounded. He did not understand why the long-range sniper rifle would fire automatically. However, he knew that he was in big trouble because when he left the control room, he did not withdraw the control authority according to the regulations. In the situation just now, anyone who entered the control room could freely control the long-range sniper rifle to attack. It's them. They did it. I was in the toilet just now. They were the only ones there. Staff Sergeant Harold's eyes lit up when he saw Staff Sergeant Emery, David, and Myron. Staff Sergeant Emery, who are they? Why are they here? One of the military police Kaji turned to look at Staff Sergeant Emery and asked in a deep voice, Sir, these two are students arranged by the city government to visit. They have a written application and the approval of Eton Middle School. Please check. Staff Sergeant Emery replied with a salute. Then, he pulled out a document from his identity bracelet and passed it to the military police Kaji. The military police Kaji opened the document with his identity bracelet and read it carefully. Then, he used his authority to check the relevant procedures. There's no problem with their identities. The military police Kaji nodded. He did not ask whether the three had entered the control room because there were surveillance systems everywhere. The two military police Kaji were able to arrive immediately because of Staff Sergeant Emery's warning and the surveillance system. Officers, they were the only ones there when I left. It must be them. Staff Sergeant Harold was still making his final struggle. David heard Staff Sergeant Harold's insistence that it was them. Although it was the truth, Staff Sergeant Harold's attitude still eased his guilt. Originally, he wanted to use his connections to reduce Staff Sergeant Harold's punishment. After all, he was the one who had implicated Staff Sergeant Harold. However, David now changed his mind. Perhaps this incident could help strengthen the military discipline of the City Defense Brigade. Staff Sergeant Harold was indeed in the wrong. With such an undisciplined style, even if nothing happened today, there would be a day when something big would happen. The two military police Kaji ignored Staff Sergeant Harold's shouts. Instead, they took out a pair of handcuffs, cuffed his hands, and brought him away from the city wall. Officers, please don't tell anyone about what happened today. It was just an accident. Staff Sergeant Emery pleaded with David and Myron in embarrassment. No problem. We didn't see anything. Myron immediately replied. The further away they were from the military, the better, especially when they still had a lot of doubts about it. Thank you. Today's visit will end here. I'll send you off. Staff Sergeant Emery gestured for them to leave. The two knew that after this incident, they could no longer stay on the city wall. They followed Staff Sergeant Emery to the elevator they came from. In fact, Staff Sergeant Emery's idea of not letting anyone know about this accident was definitely going to fail. The impact of this incident was far from an ordinary mistake. In this inexplicable attack, the owner of the West Hotel, Mr. West, was hit by a large level 1 bullet fired from a long-range sniper rifle. His body was instantly smashed into minced meat. Not even his corpse was left intact. Chapter 49. David, is the sudden firing of the long-range sniper really unrelated to you? Myron asked David with a serious expression on his face as he turned on autopilot on the way back. Myron, you were standing beside me at the time. How could you not know what I was doing? David shrugged. Of course I knew. It was just too much of a coincidence. Myron shook his head and sighed. I think so too, David said with a smile. David, you didn't hack the city defense system and let the long-range sniper cannon fire, did you? Myron asked again. He knew that David had a good foundation in electronics. He had seen the medium-sized server sent by Leeson Security. Such a professional server wasn't something ordinary people could play with. That's a military city defense system. It's not like the civilian security system at home that can be hacked by a few mercenaries. David said helplessly to Myron. Just then, Myron's identity bracelet received a notification. He opened it and was stunned when he saw the message. David, it's really big this time. That long-range sniper cannon just hit Mr. Stett. Myron suddenly thought of something and looked at David with his mouth agape. Myron, what happened to Mr. Stett? David asked, pretending to be shocked. Seeing David like this, Myron's mind turned. Although David's relationship with Mr. Stett was extremely awkward, it was impossible for him to kill Mr. Stett because of that unless David was mentally sick. Based on the time that Myron had spent with David recently, David was definitely not someone mentally sick. On the contrary, he was very easy to get along with. Even the arrogance of a genius was nowhere to be seen on David. Myron had initially approached David because he wanted to receive Galen's guidance. After spending some time with David, he felt that a friend like David was worth keeping. Even his father, Mayor Bernard, felt the same way. Investing in a genius was something that many people would do. This time, he contacted the military to visit the city wall. If it wasn't for the participation of Mayor Bernard, it wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Mr. Stefan is dead. Myron also lost interest in pursuing the matter. He wanted to go back and ask his father about the direction of the matter. After all, he and David were both at the scene, and this would more or less implicate the two of them. Neither of them said anything. Myron sent David home and left in a hurry. As David watched Myron's car leave, he couldn't help but feel a little apologetic. He wanted to make it up to Myron when he could. When he got home, he went to the computer room. This time, he didn't enter the virtual world. Instead, he logged into the Hester Hotel's security optical computer. When David overheard the conversation between Mr. Stett and Mr. Jeremy, he noticed that the anonymous company was mentioned. He found this unremarkable company in the security photon computer. The name of the company was Mountain Water Investment Company. The legal person of the company was a code generated by a specific authentication software. This type of anonymous company was also a type of company unique to the Interstellar Federation. It was used to conceal some of their actions. Anonymous companies could only remain anonymous when they weren't in business. Once the company started to generate profits, a real person would have to be appointed as the legal person. Just like how Mr. Stett used this anonymous company to purchase the Central and Western hotels, the two hotels probably didn't expect anyone to buy them, so they didn't take any precautions. The hotels in this small city were indeed very large for the average person, but for the truly rich or large companies, they were of no value at all. Only an organization that wanted to increase Mr. Stett's influence would continuously pour in credits to help him. Only then would Mr. Stett have the financial resources to complete this plan. David transferred the hidden authentication software to his own medium-sized server, and the Mountain Water Investment Company became his private property. At the very least, when the two hotels received their dividends in July, Mountain Water Investment Company wouldn't be required to appoint a natural person as the legal person. When David checked Mountain Water Investment Company, he found that there were still 40 million credits left in the company's accounts. Moreover, there was a designated use for it, which was to purchase shares of the Central and Western hotels at a fixed time. Of course, David wouldn't use the credits like that. He didn't need any shares of the Central and Western hotels. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want to attract too much attention, he was prepared to sell the 40% shares of the two hotels. He canceled the purchase and transferred the 40 million credits to his anonymous account in the Yucca Bank. This way, Mountain Water Investment Company was only an empty shell, and it held 40% of the shares of the Central and Western hotels. By July, he would have finished his college entrance exams and could leave Parent City for non-city at any time. At that time, he could sell the shares or use his own name to become the legal person of the company. There wouldn't be any problems. Most importantly, as his training progressed, he would need more and more resources. For the past few days, his rank 1 fortified meat had been left behind by Myron, but it would only last him until he reached 1,000 kilograms. After that, he wouldn't have any left. He also wanted to buy rank 1 fortified meat, but it wasn't something that could be bought with money. It wouldn't be a problem to buy a little at a time, but if he wanted to buy it for a long time, he would need a fixed channel. Rank 1 fortified meat could only be obtained by killing rank 1 insectoids. Kaji's hunting speed wasn't fast, and most of the rank 1 fortified meat would be sent to their own channels to be sold in bigger cities. The amount of rank 1 fortified meat that could be left in Parent City was too little, so little that people like David couldn't even buy it. He also didn't want to keep asking Myron for help. Too many favors would affect the friendship between them. David threw the matter of rank 1 fortified meat aside, and once again entered the Astor Hotel's security photon computer. He erased all traces of himself from the security photon computer and even restored the account he used. In the end, he left a small program in the security holobrain, then left the holobrain. After he left, the program automatically ran and erased the information of his departure. Then, the program erased itself. From then on, the security photon computer of the Astor Hotel no longer had any traces of David's entry. Unless someone knew of David's existence and found an expert in this field, they might be able to find some clues, but the possibility was too small. Garen, what did you teach David? In an office of the legal department, Hans looked at the silhouette on his bracelet and asked, Hans, your son is a genius, or rather, genius isn't accurate enough. He's a monster. You've ruined his future. Garen complained with extreme dissatisfaction. Garen, it doesn't matter if David is a genius or not, but the problem here is related to David. So I want to ask if you taught David some other ability? Hans had heard of Garen's praises before, but he didn't really believe in geniuses. He knew better than anyone else what kind of person his son was, so he only wanted to ask about something he was more concerned about. Although his relationship with David had been bad all these years, he still cared a lot about him. He knew a lot about David through the AI butler Emma. What happened? Garen also heard the problem and quickly asked. Mr. Astor was killed by a long-range sniper, and David was on the wall where the long-range sniper was. Hans said in a deep voice, Mr. Astor, Bertha's father, you suspect the guy who went against David? Garen asked in surprise. Of course. He knew who Mr. Astor was. In fact, not only Hans, but he also suspected whether Mr. Astor was involved in the operation against David when he received detailed information about David. The reason was simple. The security manager of the Astor Hotel, Amos, actually appeared outside David's house, and according to the investigation, Amos' identity bracelet was located outside David's house for a few days. It was impossible to say that Amos was protecting David. Mr. Astor had no reason to protect David, and how would Mr. Astor know that David would be in danger? Sending a Kaji to monitor David was not a small matter. Chapter 50. Hans, I didn't spend much time in Parent City. I only taught David physical skills and the war hammer. I didn't teach him anything else, but I did say that David is a genius. He has excellent electronic countermeasure technology. Did you know that? Galen asked. Galen, did you make a mistake? How could David possibly know about electronic warfare? His grades in all his subjects are terrible. How could he possibly have the ability to learn electronic warfare? Hans was truly shocked this time. He exclaimed in disbelief. Hans, you really need to understand your child better. David can find the traps in the security system and control them. This level of skill is enough for him to enter any large software company and find a decent job. Galen shook his head. Mr. Nast, could it really be David who did it? Hans asked softly. It doesn't matter if it was him or not. It's just that Mr. Nast has been cut off. It'll be even more troublesome to find out who's after David. Galen didn't care if it was David who killed him or not. It was fine as long as they couldn't find out. Hans was able to return alive from the brink of death on Warstar. He wasn't a simple person. Although he had lost the ability to fight, his judgment was still there. In fact, after discovering that Amos was spying on David, although Amos was killed and the direct evidence was broken, the only one who could command Amos was Mr. Stefan. Although Hans didn't ask about official matters, when it came to David and his wife's father, Mr. Nast, he still hired professionals from the legal department to investigate this matter. However, aside from Galen, no one else knew that he was investigating this matter. He even found out that there was a faction behind Mr. Nast. This faction had been helping Mr. Nast, allowing Mr. Nast's hotel to develop rapidly and his influence to grow. However, he couldn't find out who this faction was. I have a good relationship with the military. I will ask more about this matter. If I really find out that it has something to do with David, I may need your help to take David away in advance. Hans pleaded. Don't worry, it's just a small matter. However, in my opinion, David doesn't have the ability to break through the military defense system. Someone must have helped him. Galen said with a smile. He had been with David for about the same amount of time as Myron, but he knew David better than Myron did. David's killing intent showed that David wasn't the kind of person who could stay quiet after being attacked. This kind of vengeful character was what a warrior should have. As long as David did not want to become an ordinary person, he had to experience the battlefield. This killing intent could protect him. Stefan is dead? Trainer Jeremy looked at the information on his identity bracelet, and his eyes flashed with horror. When he saw that David was not far away from the long-range sniper that killed Mr. Stefan, he immediately knew that David was the murderer. This kind of feeling was his ability. His soul's recuperation gave him this kind of ability. Mr. Stefan's sudden death broke his arrangements in Parent City and delayed him for at least a few years. A white light flashed on his body, and then the alloy cup in his hand was unintentionally crushed into an iron ball. He seemed to feel that he had lost his composure, and he threw the iron ball in his hand into the trash can beside him. If anyone was here, they would realize how powerful Trainer Jeremy was. He could crush the alloy cup into an iron ball with just his hands, and his hands were completely fine. This meant that he was extremely strong, and at the same time, his body was extremely strong. In this regard, he was different from the ordinary Kaji. Kaji was also very strong without armor, but the strength of his body was not much stronger than that of an ordinary person. The most different thing was the white light that flashed on Trainer Jeremy's body. That kind of instantaneous burst of strength should be some kind of special technique. Stefan is dead, but I must get the title of National Knight. Everything needs to be replanned. Trainer Jeremy returned to his previous state and muttered to himself. Mr. Stefan's death shocked Parent City. However, with Hans, the National Knight, there was no one who took advantage of this opportunity to rob the Stefan Hotel of its benefits. It was not that the other businessmen did not want to, but it was not worth offending a National Knight for these benefits. Bertha, as Mr. Stefan's daughter, became the owner of the Stefan Hotel. Of course, this was also related to Hans's official position, and only Bertha could take over the Stefan Hotel. Surprisingly, the entire Stefan Hotel did not fall into chaos because of this huge accident. In the orderly handover, all the work was maintained as normal. This was also related to Hans. Although it was said that Bertha took over the Stefan Hotel, everyone knew that Bertha was a young lady. She was as beautiful as a flower, and there was no problem for her to enjoy a comfortable life. However, to have her manage the family's hotel was too much. Therefore, the only person who could truly manage the hotel was Hans. A national knight became the owner of the hotel, which made everyone in the hotel extremely happy. Hans did not have much work to do, so he could only manage the Stefan Hotel with his wife. At the same time, he was looking for more professional managers. Of course, the reason why Hans intervened in the company's affairs was not because he cared about the benefits involved, but because he wanted to find clues about the person behind the scenes. However, he did not expect that David had already wiped out all the clues. The entire Stefan Hotel was as clean as a piece of white paper. Hans had always been concerned about whether Mr. Stefan's death was related to David, but all his worries were dispelled by the military statement. Due to Staff Sergeant Harold's negligence of duty, the long-range sniper cannon in the city's defense system was operating abnormally, which resulted in the death of a citizen. For this, the military is deeply sorry. The military will give Staff Sergeant Harold a fair verdict. Throughout the statement, the military did not explain the specific process of the incident at all, nor did they give a specific verdict. Everything was vague and vague. This naturally had to do with Hans' attitude. The military had asked for Hans' opinion before, and Hans thought that it might have something to do with David, so he wanted to settle it quietly. This was in line with the military's wishes. They did not want to make a big deal out of it, and Lieutenant Eaton also owed Hans a favor. Therefore, in this statement, even a person of high status like Mr. Stefan had become a citizen in the statement. In just a day, the impact of Mr. Stefan's death had mostly disappeared. Mr. Stefan probably did not expect his death to be so minor. At night, David received news from Hans and Myron regarding the handling of Mr. Stefan's death. As for the City Defense Brigade, they had requested experts to come over and inspect the city's defense system, which might take up to 3 days. However, in the report, the City Defense Brigade's biggest suspicion was that Staff Sergeant Harold did not have the authority to shut down the door, nor did he turn off the access control, which allowed some little bugs to touch the control device and trigger the long-range sniper cannon. As for why the cannon hit Mr. Stefan so accurately from 6 kilometers away, it could only be said that Mr. Stefan was unlucky. In particular, the surveillance equipment set up outside the control room did not detect anyone entering the control room at all, and Staff Sergeant Harold had the audacity to turn off the surveillance equipment inside the control room. Of course, he was not the only one who turned off the surveillance equipment inside the control room. Many of the control rooms in the City Defense Brigade had turned off their surveillance equipment. However, it was precisely because of the lack of surveillance equipment that most of the blame was thrown to Staff Sergeant Harold. At the same time, the City Defense Brigade carried out a large-scale reorganization. All the soldiers were re-educated, and every link was started to implement the most standard military standards. The military police also increased the intensity of their patrols, and the entire City Defense Brigade entered a period of strict military discipline. The benefit of this was that the City Defense Brigade's combat power was renewed. At least for a short period of time, no one would dare to violate the rules again. Hans did not mention his suspicions. Instead, it was Myron who said in the news that the military did not mention anything about the two of them being present in the report. Lieutenant Eaton even contacted Mayor Bernard to explain the situation. It was partly because of Mayor Bernard's face, but also because Lieutenant Eaton owed Hans a favor. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.